Chapter 383. When Dark Elf Beck asked me for help, I was quite calm. After all, it seemed that we were the only ones who could help him right now. In fact, I was even a little excited. I've finally met a proper storyline. I, Roland, actually have a day where I can save a damsel in distress and defeat a slave trader. Could it be that the world is finally going to change? I'm finally going to walk on my path of greatness. If my guess was correct, and this family's eldest daughter had been kidnapped by a certain elf slave trader, then from a certain standpoint, this would be a very cliché fantasy storyline. Later on, I would just have to fight the slave trader and the mastermind behind the scenes. Perhaps I would even be able to obtain a few servants who were completely loyal to me. This storyline would be quite boring, but it would also be a rather proper development. No, this obviously isn't the right storyline. We should think more about it. If she was deeply in love with a certain man and decided to abandon her family and species in order to pursue her own love, then this would probably be a Korean or Japanese drama. And if she caught the eye of a certain domineering prince or CEO, then this would probably be a female-oriented storyline. If there was a sequel about a royal power struggle, then it would probably be one of the most popular harem dramas in the past 2 years. But it seemed that the storyline was even more wrong. My eldest daughter's name is Yolanda, and she's already 6 to 7 years old. Alright then, a 6 to 7-year-old eldest daughter. It seemed that it was a bit too much for her to have a harem fight at such an age. Could it be that she got too high from dancing in the plaza and was arrested by the town security? Actually, I heard that there were also harem fights and grudges, as well as love killings and love triangles. Cough, cough, I should listen to the story more seriously. Reality would always be more bizarre than stories. This was because there was no need for logic in reality. There were so many weirdos in the world, and using a normal person's logic to guess the actions of weirdos was basically asking for trouble. Even without meeting her, I was certain that this half-elf named Yolanda was definitely a weirdo. You're saying that she's a half-elf with a market value of over 10,000 gold coins, and she ran off to join a certain prince in pursuit of wealth? Doesn't she know that her dark elf bloodline will cause suspicion? Perhaps she'll directly be sold to a slave trader. Slave trading in this country isn't illegal, and dark elf slaves are forever top-selling goods with an average price of over 60,000 gold coins. There's no market for them. The moment I said this, all the dark elves present looked at me in astonishment. The half-elf girl even took a step back and looked at me with a dangerous expression. Alright then. It would seem that I accidentally exposed something. Fine, I admit that I was indeed tempted to buy a dark elf to corrupt myself. It wasn't that I had any special expectations, but rather that my maids weren't by my side right now, which made me feel rather empty. It was quite displeasing to have to do everything by myself. Not only that, I didn't have any servants to help me, but I also didn't have any. I didn't need to be so much. I didn't need to feel so empty, so that I had to do everything by myself. What's wrong with heroes and legends? Heroes don't have to wash the dishes after eating, and legends don't have to sharpen their knives and mend their clothes. I really miss the corrupt life in the past. At least I don't have to worry every day about whether to eat black bread dipped in milk or to drink milk with pieces of black bread. I couldn't help it. How could I possibly have a sumptuous meal prepared whenever I was outside? Bread and milk were the staple foods of the entire world, yet I didn't like either of them, which made me feel even worse. Yep, I admit that I wasn't a staunch revolutionary. I had already been corrupted by the sugar-coated bullets of feudal society. Who said that I had a maid complex? I had a maid complex. So what? I was a feudal landlord, and I was proud to have a maid complex. At the very least, I would pay her wages. As for why I was considering elves, wasn't it because humans were too weak and had too short a lifespan? An elf could be used for several hundred years. Cough, that wasn't the only use, so don't get the wrong idea. What? The silly cat could do it. I had to prepare milk and eggs for her every day, and if I forgot, she would go around telling everyone that I was a cat abuser. I was even starting to wonder who the real owner was. But when considering my personal image, especially since the town security elves were treating me like a saint more and more, even if I coincidentally met a country where slave trading was legal, this little hobby of mine had never been realized. I had originally thought that I would be able to openly obtain an elven made by cracking down on slave traders, but now that I heard that the plot was so strange, I was naturally quite disappointed. Of course, Beck didn't know about these changes. He was only feeling conflicted about his strange daughter. Yolanda felt that she could hide her identity. To summarize, she was addicted to night novels, so she disguised her identity and joined a certain prince's assassin squadron. If it wasn't for the fact that she failed the maid test, would she have become a maid? Dark Elf Beck felt rather helpless when talking about his disappointing eldest daughter. There were many things that he couldn't say out loud. For example, his eldest daughter had been quite normal in the mountains, but she became a cripple who was addicted to night novels after coming to this city. She didn't go to work or go out every day, and only stayed at home thinking that some tyrannical prince would take a liking to her. Recently, she finally left home, but it was to chase after her true love. In fact, when Beck tried to stop her from leaving, she said, probably because she had seen far too many stories of people pretending to be in love with each other being exposed. Are you worried that you'll be exposed? That won't happen. I'm the true daughter of destiny. Just like in the stories, all dangers will transform into opportunities. When I'm exposed, I should be able to meet my beloved prince. Sigh, can't my daughter be a little more normal? Sigh, I really wish I had a maid. The two men sighed at the same time, but the content of their sighs was quite different. However, the troubles in their sighs faintly resonated with each other, causing me to have a better impression of Beck. As for me, although I didn't understand why Beck's expression was so complex, I could more or less understand his helplessness and worry. After all, any family would encounter naughty children, and the current situation was indeed quite dangerous. No wonder Beck was begging me to save Yolanda. By now, everyone knew that Prince Mills had been assassinated by a dark elf. It was only natural that the entire city would be on the lookout. And if Yolanda was discovered to be a dark elf, she would be killed. And if Yolanda discovered that her father and younger sister were actually involved in the assassination, it would be quite easy for her to do something. And if her identity was exposed, it would be the end of the world. This is her contact address. I'm afraid that we won't be able to enter the city right now. Please give her a message. No, please bring her out, no matter if she's willing or not. This city will become even more dangerous in the future, especially for elves like us. This was quite a small matter, so how could I possibly refuse? As expected of the romantic elves. Perhaps you'll have a half-elf granddaughter in the future. Seeing how awkward the atmosphere was, I casually joked as I accepted Beck's contact address. Old Beck could only smile wryly and didn't say anything. However, little Rhea, who had been biting my hand and wouldn't let go, suddenly spoke up. That's impossible. Us sisters would never have a human as a husband. I chuckled upon hearing this. Little girl, don't hate humans because of this. There are good humans and bad humans. There are evil bastards who want to kill you, but aren't there also people who want to save you? At the very least, I'm a human as well, probably. If this little girl had nodded innocently or directly retorted that humans are all bad, it would probably have been a normal scenario, but are you an idiot? What does this have to do with humans being good or bad? Rhea rolled her eyes and looked at me as if I was an idiot, just like how Harloy sometimes looked at me. Only now did I recall that half-elves were a famous species of fake lowly. Their physical bodies grew at a speed comparable to elves, but their souls were only slightly slower than humans. A half-elf who looked like a young girl should already have the knowledge and personality of an adult. Perhaps that older sister who was poisoned by night novels also didn't look like an adult. Ordinary humans have such short lifespans, while we have such long lifespans. This was destined to be a tragic relationship from the very start. How could I be so foolish as to touch it? Rhea was angrily glaring at her father as she said this. Ever since Mom's wrinkled face interacted with Dad, I felt that this might not be the correct choice. From the day that Mom abandoned us 10 years ago, I swore that I would never find a human as my future partner. Only that mischievous older sister of mine would be so foolish and naive. When she returns, I'll properly teach her a lesson. Beck's father had an expression of helplessness and guilt when faced with his younger daughter's anger. In his opinion, it was enough for him to spend a lifetime with the person he loved. But for his daughters, watching their mother die of old age was a great deal of trouble. However, I suddenly thought of another problem. Then why did you bite me when you actually have the thought process of an adult? I hate people who treat me like a child the most, especially someone like you who's obviously an idiot. Idiot? Me? I'm already 60 years old, and I'm about to become a master alchemist and enchanter, gold. I know 12 languages, and if it wasn't for my special circumstances, I would have long since obtained the title of scholar. You're at most 20 years old. Didn't you obtain a high status because of your birth? What else do you know? If you're not an ignorant idiot, then what are you? From a certain standpoint, half-elves were indeed a species favored by the heavens. Their growth rate was comparable to that of humans. Plus, elves had a reduced lifespan. As long as they weren't too lazy, they would sooner or later reach the peak in a certain area. However, perhaps it was precisely because of their natural talents that surpassed the two species from which they came from, that they weren't welcomed by the two species. Since their bodies weren't fully developed yet, it was only natural that they would be unable to achieve anything in their combat job class. If they wanted to learn magic, there was no way for them to do so. Indeed, it would be more suitable for them to work hard in the field of knowledge. However, the fact that she was able to become a master alchemist proved that her natural talent and hard work were both excellent. This was the first time that someone had ever accused me of being ignorant and incompetent. I was immediately angered and amused, but then I thought of some other trivial matters. If this Rhea really had the intelligence of an adult, why would she be so foolish as to offend me in my territory? She was only trying to show off her own value and make us pay more attention to her. A master alchemist who was about to break through to the gold rank would be quite valuable, while a master alchemist who didn't have the ability to protect herself would only be a precious treasure. Perhaps she also saw the current situation and thought of the possibility that she would be treated as a murderer and handed over to the authorities. Being exploited for her value was better than being burned at a stake. Otherwise, she wouldn't have risked her life to reveal her value. Considering things this way, her intelligence and actions far surpassed her immature outer appearance. Harlois seems to be the same type of person as you. She seems pure but is actually a black-bellied fake lowly. Why can't I meet someone who's a little more foolish, cute, and normal? TSK, she's far inferior to me. However, she's indeed a good seedling. I intend to do a few small tests. If it's possible, perhaps you'll have a junior sister. Forget it. I have plenty of juniors and juniors. Only a few of them are still alive. If you're acting like a teacher again, you can play with little girls by yourself. I tossed the silly cat, who was rolling and screaming in midair, to Rhea and said, "Little girl, don't overthink things. The Bardi Empire doesn't have the ability to make me hand over anyone. By the way, I'm already more than 300 gold coins, while the silly cat in your hands is at least 10,000 gold coins." I didn't even look at the astonished Rhea as I went about my own business. Since I had already reached a preliminary agreement with the Bardi royalty, there was naturally no need to hide in a cramped assault airship. While I had them make some adjustments, it was also time for me to check on the situation of the people who had stayed behind in the Bardi Empire's residence. The people who stayed behind in the Bardi Empire's residence were all true diplomats from the Mage country. Envoys wouldn't be killed in a battle between two countries, so they stayed behind to test Bardi's attitude. The moment that I left the residence, someone chased after me. Grim. Glyna. I want to go out for a walk as well. I met with such a situation as soon as I arrived. I haven't even had the chance to tour around the Bardi Empire yet. Compared to the past, even though I still wore an eye patch for my evil eyes, my complexion was much better. Even though I still looked young, the way I dressed made me look more feminine and cute. This wasn't just the effect of my blood transfusion to suppress my magic veins, it was also the tacit understanding between Carwens and me. Two descendants, one on each side. Whoever's disciple is more accomplished will be the strongest. That was probably what Cavendish was thinking. Ignoring whether or not my Chinibya way of thinking was correct, at the very least, Glyna was able to sleep peacefully every night without her bloodline calling out to her. At the very least, her personality had matured quite a bit. As I watched her skillfully jump into the Grim-style armor, her fingers nimbly clicking on all the switches as she excitedly activated the armor, I immediately decided to take back what I had just said. Boss, the current Grim is more than 5 times more powerful than before. There's also a storage space for gunpowder, so its combat strength is at least 3 times more powerful than before. Give the order. Let's go all out. A deep male voice came from the armor as numerous lights lit up. All sorts of explosives and cannons were taken out and adjusted. The machine gun under Glyna's arm automatically reloaded. As I listened to the young man's excited voice, I once again confirmed the rumor about Queen Sleware. Queen Glyna had 2 personalities. As long as she put on the armor, her personality would automatically switch. I shook my head and stopped thinking too much about it. I wasn't a Chinibia like Cavendish, nor was I a pedophile like Harlois. I would rather let nature take its course as to what Glyna would become. But now, I could more or less understand why she automatically followed me. She probably didn't know that we were still negotiating with the Bardi Empire. Seeing that I had come out, she probably thought that there would be a chance to fight, so she directly followed me. Still, I had no intentions of refusing. This was a perfect opportunity to learn more about the changes in my home. Although I had plenty of information, how could it compare to the personal feelings of the people involved? As I expected, Glyna was quite depressed when she discovered that there was no battle to fight. I need a chance to test my new weapon in actual combat. However, she became much more serious when talking about the situation in the Northlands. After all, she had already been the queen for almost a year. Unlike Renee, who had many helpers, Glyna could mostly only rely on herself. As long as our new crops have a good harvest, this year's situation won't be too bad no matter how bad it is. Also, the barbarians' holy mountain seems to have discovered a new mithril mine. It's just that the old barbarians are still arguing against mining it. But I feel like it's only a matter of time before they agree with your merchant alliance's silver bullets. Of course, I'm guessing that you want to know the most about the Northland's public opinion and the morale of the people. I can only say that it's much better than expected. Morale is quite high, and the people's hearts can be used. Glyna endlessly talked about official matters while her small hands were playing with various firearms and explosives, disassembling, assembling, and adjusting them. She was multitasking and didn't make a single mistake. While I sighed at how strange this girl's personality was becoming, I was actually quite happy. After all, the Northlands had now become our base of operations. If everything went smoothly there, that would be the best news. From a certain standpoint, Glyna was far more normal than her cousin Renee. At the very least, compared to Princess Renee, who was becoming more and more known as the active seal, Queen Glyna's reputation for being an expert in government affairs and wise was becoming more and more widespread. As a genius engineer, Glyna had an incredibly deep understanding of magical engineering to begin with. In fact, she was already using magical engineering products to change the lives of the Sleware Kingdom's citizens. Not to mention, she was also quite talented in military and political affairs. Perhaps Cavendish's way of thinking was correct. Compared to Renee, who was becoming more and more brute force, Glyna was the most suitable successor for me, who had a lot of knowledge in miscellaneous fields. Of course, this wasn't because I was intending to retire from the front lines at such a young age. It was because it was necessary to have a backup plan. Nobody could guarantee that I wouldn't suddenly be killed by a true god on the streets, or meet with an assassin. I suddenly feel like I'm a jinx. Heh, I think we're quite lucky. It's about time to show them our new equipment. We were only 1 street away from our temporary base. However, there were suddenly very few people on the street. The intentionally concealed breathing and shadows in the darkness revealed the identity of the newcomers' assassins. Hey, Glyna, remember to leave 2 people alive for interrogation. Chapter 384. 2 Under the Tree. I casually told them their locations. Following the explosion of flames, I discovered that Grimm's mecha's machine gun was in the shape of a gun. Fine then, if I used caliber and power to define the difference between a gun and a cannon, then this was a machine gun. The golden-coated machine gun spun furiously, and the muzzle spat out bright red flames. Every shot naturally exploded, followed by endless explosions and screams of pain. When the machine gun's barrel overheated and was forced to stop, The mecha instantly released a large amount of steam. All that was left of the towering tree was a tree stump and splintered wood. As for the unlucky bastard hiding inside, he had probably turned into a hornet's nest. If I looked carefully, I might be able to piece him back together. 2 under the ground. This time, I casually stomped on the ground, and the entire brick floor would be as hard as an Arctic glacier. No matter how they entered, I could only hope that they would be able to find a way out before they suffocated. Noticing that we had discovered the assassins, there was a sharp shout, and countless black-clothed individuals jumped out from rooftops, corners, trash cans, saws, and all sorts of other unusual places. Just as I was about to draw my sword, I saw Grimm's mecha's entire body flash with light, and all of its joints were smoking, so I rationally took a step back. Fire all bullets. The next instant, small holes opened up on the mecha's knees, chest, and shoulders. Fire-colored bullets shot out, creating beautiful fireworks and fatal explosions. Countless meteors streaked through the sky, lighting up the entire night sky. What followed was endless screams and howls of pain. Now that Grimm's mecha no longer needed to disguise itself as a normal male, Glyna unhesitatingly modified and evolved her mecha. Or perhaps it should be said that she dismantled and reassembled it. Perhaps it was because she had heard a certain person's nonsense about having more cannon turrets is justice, or perhaps it was her nature to worship the results of explosions. It was said that the new Grimm mecha had over 100 cannons on its body. Fine then, apart from its basic walking function, it was basically a mobile cannon turret. The key difference between the new Grimm mecha and the previous one was that the new Grimm mecha was a product of magical engineering. The breakthrough of a key technological bottleneck often led to the advancement of the entire industry. This was a process that could be used in any world. In the past, the guns and cannons of this world were still the upgraded and improved versions of the traditional dwarven guns. No matter how much the parts were upgraded, the theory was still the same as the dwarfs. Dwarven gunpowder would be used to create a small explosion in the gun's chamber, and the propelling force would be used to shoot out tiny copper pellets that would then kill and injure the opponent. In principle, this seemed to be similar to the most primitive flintlock on Earth. However, due to the progress in the smelting of magical metals, and the advantage of alchemy in the distribution of explosives, a well-made dwarven flintlock was already quite powerful. It was enough to pose a threat to a silver-ranked combatant. However, it lacked the threat to a top-tier warrior. That was its weakness. Of course, the intelligence of the otherworld people was not to be underestimated. Their technology was not enough to increase the lethality of the dwarven firearms, so they adopted the primitive method of expanding the size of the dwarven firearms. The enlarged dwarven cannons, siege cannons, giant goblin cannons, and titan cannons were all very deadly. The power of a single gun wouldn't be enough to kill you, but the goblin cannons with the combined power of 100 guns would definitely be enough. However, the increase in size and mass also made these guns and cannons abnormally difficult to use. They were difficult to move and could only be used for sieging, defending, and warship battles. Their most fatal flaw was the lack of accuracy caused by their slow movement. Coupled with the fact that dwarven and goblin products had always been unreliable, these cannons could only become immobile siege weapons. Even among siege equipment, due to the competition from ballistae, ancient relics, and mage towers, these cannons couldn't be considered outstanding. That was why, although cannons had long since appeared in this cold weapon battlefield where flying troops and elite individual soldiers existed, cannons had always been limited to low-end battles where they killed a large number of ordinary soldiers. In fact, some military experts even treated cannons as useless in actual combat. After all, elite squadrons and top-level individuals would often be able to easily crush ordinary warriors. Even if they killed all ordinary soldiers, they wouldn't be able to obtain any substantial combat results. And after Olivia's magic box and the 4 elemental swordcasters who wielded magic swords were introduced, a new job class was born. However, this job class didn't receive much attention, the magic bullet shooter class. The magic guns they wielded were actually created from the same system as Olivia's magic sword. This meant that the magic guns they wielded were fundamentally different from the dwarven firearms. Their magic guns and magic bullets were magically powered. They were creations that could be strengthened with the magic and engineering of this world. Not powerful enough. Have a taste of my fire magic bullets. They even had explosive and cluster effects. Not fast enough. Wind magic bullets flew faster than birds, and they even had an acceleration effect. If you still felt that they weren't fast enough, here were also lightning magic bullets. Just that, you had to be prepared to defend against lightning before using them. Super defensive targets. Have a taste of my earth magic armor-piercing bullets. These bullets are as hard as diamonds. Do you need to obstruct the target and assist them? Have a taste of my mist magic bullets. I also have ice magic bullets that can freeze the ground, and spiderweb magic bullets that can stick to enemies. The job classes created by Olivia's magic box were all job classes that relied on external items. While the 4 elemental swordcasters were focused on researching sword seals and magic swords, the magic bullet shooters were also competing with their own magic guns and magic bullets. Wind magic gun barrels that increased the speed of bullets, gun muzzles that increased the armor-piercing effect of bullets, scopes that came with the eagle's eye spell, and many other accessories were invented. While magic energy consumption skyrocketed, these accessories also made the magic bullet shooters even more powerful. These basic improvements were only the beginning. Along with the improvements in weapons, there were also all sorts of specialized combat techniques. The wind magic bullet shooters had not only incredibly long-range magic sniper guns, but they also had techniques that allowed magic bullets to freely fly through the air like snakes. Meanwhile, the top-level fire magic bullet shooters focused their attention on firepower and power. Yep, Glyna was one of them. Last year, when Renee was still hesitantly trying to become a 4-elemental swordcaster, the young Queen of Antoon also immediately came into contact with Olivia's magic box and unhesitatingly became a magic bullet shooter. However, unlike Renee, who was always slacking off, Glyna, who was capable of inventing the grim mecha armor in the underground and was skilled at creating all sorts of explosives, was definitely a top-level genius mechanic. When Glyna acutely noticed the dawn of a new generation, she unhesitatingly threw herself into it. Unlike Timlad, who focused on creating things in theory, the eternally insecure Glyna focused on actual combat. She focused on inventing all sorts of practical firearms, such as this revolving cannon. If this cannon was powered by traditional gunpowder, it would require reloading every time it exploded. Continuous explosions would basically be suicidal. But if it was powered by wind and fire magic, as long as the mechanics were up to par, it would be easy to fire in rapid succession. Not to mention, it was possible to use magic to strengthen the gun's body and increase the explosive power. But this was only the beginning. The entire Grim Mecha armor was actually Glyna's Olivia magic gun. The bullets it fired were filled with fire magic. Glyna's demon bloodline was naturally inclined towards fire, so she had plenty of fire magic. For example, since I had the abilities of a mage, my path as a 4-elemental swordcaster was quite smooth. She had natural talent as a mage to begin with, and her current abilities were the future direction of magical archers. She had already gone quite far on this path. Asterisk boom. Asterisk after an explosive fireball was fired, the entire house was reduced to rubble. Rubble flew everywhere, and a small mushroom cloud rose up into the sky. The special part about this bullet wasn't the gun itself. Instead, it was the bullet that was tossed out. That bullet was an Olivia's magic box equipped with sufficient explosive magic arrays and explosives. When all of the magic power in the box was activated in one go, all of the magic power would transform into a primer for self-destruction. This attack would be no different from a low-level mage self-destruction magic attack in terms of principle and power. And so, mushroom clouds slowly rose into the sky. The ground constantly trembled as the entire street was reduced to rubble. Of course, there was no need to recycle the Olivia's magic box that had been used in such a manner. Considering how expensive it was, the Northlands dared to do such a thing, mainly because the only magic bullet shooter who had enough money to afford such ammunition was the Queen herself. She said that the new magic bullet shooters and 4-elemental swordcasters were just for show. That was probably because she had never seen a player who was willing to spend so much money. "You're rich and willful. I'll smash you to death with gold." This was probably the foundational reason why Glyna had been able to go so far as a money-burning magic bullet shooter. But, at the very least, The power of money was quite obvious when it came to magical engineering. Her fireball was astonishingly powerful. Even a gold-ranked battle job class would be seriously injured if they didn't die. The grim mecha that was capable of continuously firing such powerful attacks was comparable to a legend-ranked mecha. I didn't even need to do anything. I watched as Glyna single-handedly suppressed all her opponents. The entire sky was filled with her cannon fire. She suspected that there were assassins hiding in hiding, and with a single blast, the assassins were sent flying along with their bunkers. Damn it, it's overheating again. The next instant, Glyna jumped out of her comfortable mecha. Judging from the black smoke rising from the cockpit, it was evident that this new mecha was still unable to fire the so-called full fireball. A berserk magical circuit would eventually burn down the mecha's magical components, which were still quite primitive. This grim mecha still needed to be perfected. I shook my head. The magic bullet shooter job class still needed to be perfected. While the grim mecha's firepower was too strong, it also lacked stability and endurance. This would also require more money to be perfected. While Glyna was busy cooling down her mecha, I immediately unsheathed my sword. Although it seemed like the assassin had been blasted into the sky, my instincts told me that there was danger lurking in the shadows. The truly troublesome assassin had yet to appear. Who could it be? It wouldn't be a good idea to assassinate me at a time like this. If I, the Bardi Empire's ambassador, died as well, a war between the two countries would be unavoidable. In that case, just who could it be? The remaining Mills faction that was unwilling to die just like this. The prince who wanted to take revenge for his brother and fight for fame. The dragons who were dissatisfied with me. The emperor who was angry from embarrassment. Although I went overboard and even threatened the undead calamity if I died, I felt that this threat was still meaningful to the Bardi royalty. The emperor will probably restrain these factions. In that case, there's only one option left for the undead to stay in the Bardi capital and not be controlled by the emperor. Undead. Dark Knight, Undead Knight, High-Level Lich, Skeleton General, Death Nogger, Demon of Corruption, and various other high-level undead walked out of the shadows. That's right, the undead army that appeared before me was the final army left behind by Asso. Even if Asso's death caused the various factions in the Bardi capital to change their attitude towards the undead, making them go from being worshipped by everyone to being hated by everyone, these high-level undead had been operating here for several decades. Asso and his subordinates were definitely sly and cunning. How could they possibly be so easily uprooted? Some of the undead remained hidden in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to viciously attack the living. And at such a critical time, if I died here, the relationship between the two countries would rapidly worsen. It might even lead to a war. In that case, the victor would naturally be the Tark Republic, a third party. There weren't many undead, no more than 20 in total. However, their quality was surprisingly high. At first glance, even the weakest undead seemed to be at the gold rank. There were quite a few legends and saints, and there were even 3 epic rank undead lords. Oh my, this is what it means to reveal the dagger. Chapter 385. Was it foolish to assassinate an undying undead emperor? There was no such thing as true immortality in this world. Even true gods who were said to be eternal and undying would enter eternal hibernation. Liches, who were viewed as undying, would naturally enter the cycle of reincarnation as long as their phylactery was shattered. The only reason they were undying was because they hadn't found the correct method to kill them yet. In that case, killing them in such a situation would only cause them to enter a short hibernation. Liches and high-level blood tribe members would recover in about 2 or 3 years and come back for revenge. Of course, there were some things that could be shared. For example, the loss of a physical body would cause the undead to enter a period of weakness. At the very least, they wouldn't be able to come out and cause trouble for a short period of time. As for me, the undying Roland, I had always entered a period of at least 20 years. If it wasn't for the fact that I had exchanged for a physical body, I probably wouldn't have been an exception to this either. Also, the information that I could obtain from my own kind probably wasn't any great secret. And so, for certain factions, killing Roland, who was the most eyesore of them all, at this critical moment, and forcing him to enter a state of revival would naturally clear all obstacles in the way of the Tark Republic's successful return. As long as everything was arranged properly, it would even cause the Mage Country and Bardi to become enemies with each other. This was truly a great deal. For individual undead, being able to slay an undead emperor was an incredible honor. Not to mention, avenging Asso's death would bring them great fame and reputation. Just the rewards from the other undead emperors would be more than enough for them to revel in. As for revenge, if the invasion succeeded, the entire Tark Republic would be the next target of revenge. But if the invasion failed, there wouldn't be any revenge at all. However, this was only what I thought about after the fact. For a fugitive, future revenge wouldn't be much of a threat. All I did was display the power level of a gold ranker and roam the streets, which naturally attracted the attention of vicious marauders. Heh, I've never tasted an undead emperor's blood before. It should be delicious. She had a pink ponytail, a little girl's body, and a red face. She was wearing cute children's clothing, and she was even licking a blood-red lollipop. She was probably a priceless treasure to some special people. As she said that, she sneaked glances at me. The blush on her face made her look like a little girl who had just seen delicious food. However, judging from the terrifying amount of blood energy around her, this vampire archduchess was obviously pretending to be young. Alexandra, you slut, stop pretending to be pure. However, I can let you try this gigolo after I'm done with him. The tall bald man's face was full of scars, but judging from his thick black armor and the black flames on it, he seemed to be a magic knight of the dark class. Revenge. The tall and skinny figure at the back waved his black scythe lightly. The black cloak turned into a shadow and he disappeared. Previously, Asso had placed all of his main subordinates in the Bardi capital to control the situation. But after the situation suddenly changed, these undead lords remained in the capital, which became a problem for me. No matter if it was in terms of aura or power level, or just the fact that these undead lords were Asso's direct subordinates, it was obvious that they were no ordinary myth-ranked undead. Unfortunately, Asso had intentionally erased their existences from my knowledge, making it impossible for me to know anything about them. Your Majesty Roland, if you're willing to hand over this recipe from my lord, not only will we not make things difficult for you, we might even become your subordinates. This vampire archduchess was all smiles as she spoke. However, just this sentence alone was sufficient evidence that the Bardi Empire had been infiltrated to the point where even such a top-level secret could be leaked. Either there was a spy among the Bardi dragons, or there was a spy among the Bardi Empire's highest-level undead. Young man, no matter how strong you were in the past, you're currently nothing more than a gold novice. How long do you think you can last against our combined forces? One was playing the bad cop, while the other was playing the good cop. It was evident that their intelligence and emotions weren't bad. This might be quite common among the leaders of other species, but this was something only top-level undead could do. After all, the undead didn't even want to admit that the higher level an undead was, the more human they were. Snake Archduchess Alexandra, Famine Agufan, and Deathsickle Harris. They're all veteran powerful undead that won't be easy to deal with. Roland, reinforcements will arrive soon. Just hold your ground. A silly cat jumped out from the shadows. As a summoned magical pet, she could appear by my side at any moment. What surprised me was that she was actually able to recognize these familiar figures. However, when I thought about how she had caused trouble everywhere in the past for the sake of revenge, and how she had also tried to contact the undead planes in an attempt to destroy the world, I felt relieved. Since even someone as experienced as her said that these undead lords would be difficult to deal with, it would seem that this would be a tough battle. Do you have any information? It's said that the Snake Archduchess isn't a human. Instead, she's an ancient blood tribe that was transformed into a winged snake. Don't be fooled by her weak appearance, as if she'll collapse with a single push. She actually doesn't have any bones in her body, and her joints can change shape at will. She's incredibly skilled at melee combat, and she also has some special fighting techniques. Don't be fooled by how valiant that Baldai looks and wears armor. But, he's actually a curse-type mage. His most vicious curse of exhaustion will cause one's stamina to decrease by 10 times, making him incredibly difficult to deal with. The longer you fight this type of opponent, the more troublesome it will be. But he specializes in curses, which will also cause a backlash and corrode his physical body. It's impossible for him to be strong in melee combat. Think of a way to get closer to him. I'm not sure about Deathsickle's exact power level. I only know that he's an incredibly strong assassin. However, his weapon is incredibly famous, Shinlo's Shout. It simultaneously has 3 negative effects: weakness, poison, and instant death. Don't get hit by it. Right, I remember that it's a scimitar. It seems that his scimitar is only used to attract attention. His robe is so long, so be careful of the blades hidden in his sleeves. Having an elder at home was truly a treasure. If I didn't have this information, even if I didn't lose, I would definitely be at a disadvantage in a fight. Not to mention, my opponent was obviously quite abnormal as well. My strategy of forcefully killing the Snake Archduchess had already been proven to be a foolish one. You've already surrounded me. The 3 myth-ranked undead weren't idiots who would waste time with words. While it seemed like they were discussing something, they actually had no intention of communicating with me from the very start. As long as I relaxed even a little, thinking that I could easily leave today, they would immediately begin their thunderous attacks. And even if they couldn't make me reveal any openings, there wouldn't be any losses. This would make it easier for the undead to set up their defenses. Snap. A bright green light leaked out from under the Grim Armor's helmet. Glyna had already recovered her combat strength, and it was precisely this reason that caused the tense undead to lose their patience. Fire all the bullets. Although she didn't know why I made such a request, Glyna unhesitatingly did as I said. Fire all the bullets. The next instant, everything in front of her turned black and then white. She was now in front of a glacier. I casually tossed Glyna into the frigid winter earth. In front of such an opponent, Glyna, who was still too young, would only be an opening. As expected, a scythe suddenly reached out from the ground where Grim's mecha had been standing. However, I was still too late. The furious Harris glared at me, but the next instant, he disappeared back into the shadows. The undead didn't have it easy either. Grim's mecha armor's instantaneous explosive power was perfect for clearing out the undead. Many unlucky undead directly died after being hit by the scythe. There was even an unlucky Lich who was casting a spell that wasn't able to dodge in time and directly turned into a pile of bones that scattered everywhere. Fatigue. The Baldy's vicious smile made me feel disgusted, but the black light on his arm was even more dangerous. The sudden feeling of fatigue made me dizzy. In my daze, I almost dropped the ice calamity in my hand. In the next instant, the little vampire girl was already in front of me, and a gigantic war hammer that was even larger than her entire body was already viciously smashing into me. Smack. This wasn't the sound of bones breaking. Instead, it was the sound of that enchanted adamantine battle hammer shattering. This hammer would probably be strong enough to shatter an ordinary city wall, but it was completely useless against my heavy armor. Alexandra had no intention of retreating at all when she faced me, who had suddenly changed in my heavy armor. She let go of her battle hammer and filled her small hands with blood energy as she directly attacked me, but this time, when her heavy punch landed on my body, I felt a faint pain in the area where she hit me. Hitting a bull through a mountain. Penetration. A blood tribe member actually chose to become a warrior monk. This wasn't because I was prejudiced against them. It was because the job class of warrior monks was all about self-torture in order to uncover one's potential. In the end, it was all about the power of life. Warrior monks were capable of infusing the power of life known as aura into their fists, allowing them to use various high-level combat techniques known as force. High-level warrior monks were able to heal themselves because they controlled the power of life. How could a blood tribe member possibly control the power of life? But the truth was right in front of me, and I had no choice but to believe it. The warrior monks were skilled at using the penetration ability that they specialized in dealing with heavy armor. The area where she hit me hurt even more, and I could faintly see blood seeping out of the wound. It was evident that her fists were covered in the unique blood energy of the blood tribe. It would have been fine if she was only a warrior monk. It wasn't as if I had never dealt with a high-level warrior monk before. However, She was incredibly agile and had excellent physical techniques. It was as if her entire body didn't have any bones. Her fists and kicks would always hit me from unexpected angles. In terms of pure melee combat techniques, she was far superior to any so-called pugilist. Not only that, her curse of exhaustion lowered my reaction speed and stamina, making it seem like I was being beaten up like a punching bag. The snake archduchess advanced like the wind and retreated like lightning. Sometimes, she would coil around me like a snake, and sometimes, she would punch me like a taut bowstring. And my heavy sword was no longer just swinging once. Every time I swung my sword, I would swing it in the wrong direction, and my opponent would already be behind me. Shouldn't it be a transmigrator using Chinese martial arts to viciously beat up an armored knight? How did it become a transmigrator knight being viciously beaten up by someone else using martial arts? This doesn't seem right. Damn it, you're still using such a dirty trick. I directly used my magic and transformed the area around me into a glacier. However, Alexandra didn't seem to notice anything at all. She only slightly opened the front part of her shirt, and I saw a string of colorful chains. Low-level ice resistance ring, ice and snow defense ring, furnace ring, and so on. After a quick count, I saw several dozen types of ice magic resistance defensive equipment. Even her little tongue that was sticking out had several magic rings on it. I didn't know how she was able to make all of these pieces of equipment work at the same time, but the reality was that she had done it. Her resistance against ice magic was now terrifyingly high. They had already made sufficient preparations to deal with me. Of course, I was still able to endure all of this. The worst part was the abnormal power of her punches. Every time she punched me, blood would clot up where I was punched, and then blood would actually start flowing out from the wounds. If I couldn't deal with this problem soon, I would die from blood loss sooner or later. That's probably her concept. The foundational difference between myth-ranked and saint-ranked individuals was that myth-ranked individuals were capable of transforming their own understanding of the world into something tangible. Fighting with that understanding as the core would be incredibly difficult to deal with. And the worst part was that the effects of such concepts were incredibly difficult to defend against or dispel. Most myth-ranked individuals would infuse their concepts into their personal weapons. However, it was obvious that Alexandra didn't have the habit of using weapons at all. Her body was her weapon. Every single attack of hers was capable of using her own blood exhaustion ability. This type of warrior monks was far too dangerous. While Roland was on high alert against his enemy, the three myth-ranked individuals were also secretly complaining. They never expected that their enemy would be so difficult to deal with. Her impenetrable armor was already shameless enough. This wasn't even part of the intelligence report. Just this armor alone was enough to cripple Hades. His death scythe actually only broke the scythe's edge. If Hades couldn't touch Alexandra's skin, he wouldn't be able to use any of his true killing moves. And so, the number one assassin under Asso's command was now only able to play the sidelines. As for Famine Agfen, he had an even bigger headache. He had already tossed out more than 10 curses, including instant death, aging, and stupidity. However, the only one that was effective was the fatigue curse that had been infused with his despair power. Hades was so resistant to curses that he even suspected that he had met the incarnation of a true god. Even the main attacker, the Snake Archduchess, wasn't having an easy time. If she landed a direct hit on Hades, even a combat job class of the same level would have died on the spot. And now, she had already attacked Hades several hundred times. Her hand had been repeatedly injured and healed several dozen times, yet Hades still didn't seem to be injured at all. Even though I'm still affected by Baldy's fatigue curse, he's still jumping around. Not only that, his armor can even reflect ice damage. If it wasn't for the fact that I brought enough defensive equipment. As expected, all undead emperors are monsters. What worried Alexandra the most was that the terrifying brute force was still howling through the air. Just the wind pressure alone was enough to suffocate people. This was enough to prove just how much unparalleled brute force was involved. This brute strength is even more vicious than that of an immemorial dragon. Although Alexandra hadn't been hit by a single sword attack, she was dancing on the edge of a cliff. If she really was hit by a sword attack, She would have to consider how many pieces she would be sliced up into. This was obviously a bad idea for the myth-ranked undead who had been intending to end the battle as quickly as possible. Just as Alexandra was getting more and more anxious, Hades suddenly put away his sword and sprouted a pair of silver wings from his back. He then flew into the air and laughed maniacally. "You've all done well, but this is meaningless. Now, I'll show you my second stage. Waha, I'm a bug that you can't understand. You want to defeat me before the servers shut down? That's impossible. I can still transform 5 more times." Chapter 386. You haven't read the walkthrough yet. Prepare yourselves. You want to kill me? You're just asking for it. A silver-winged, red-armored bird shouted in midair, "You're not ready yet." Everyone below him was panicking. This scene was rather familiar. When playing games, the only thing that was more troublesome than difficult bosses was having idiotic teammates that didn't even read the walkthrough. Actually, in the real world, such idiotic teammates were quite common. There were dark priests who cast negative energy damage at undead creatures, fire mags who tossed fireballs at fire elemental creatures, and amusing idiots who tried to sneak around and assassinate beholders. Every year, the Fairies Monthly magazine would have a very popular article, The 100 Funniest Ways to Die of the Year. If I recalled correctly, last year, there was a top-ranked demon warlock who was threatened by a 3-headed demon lord who resolved to transform himself into a demon. This wouldn't have been a big deal at first, but the demon lord who transformed himself into a speed-type demon was the most favored demon on the food chain. As a result, the demon lord laughed and directly glared at the demon warlock with a threatening glare, transforming the demon warlock into a frog that was stared at by a snake. However, if you did the exact opposite of these idiots and attacked the enemy's weaknesses, you would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. For example, the Holy Knight preferred to use war hammers rather than swords. This wasn't because of personal preference, but rather because their primary targets would always be undead and demon creatures. Skeletons, zombies, and other undead creatures were highly resistant to stabbing and slashing damage. However, it would be quite difficult for them to take damage from attacks that destroyed their physical structures and bones. Rangers in the forest preferred to use all sorts of sharp, thorny arrows. This was mainly used against unarmored beasts and beastmen. This type of arrow would leave an enemy bleeding profusely. Sometimes, it would be possible to follow a trail of blood to find an enemy that had died of HP. But if you used bleeding arrows against the undead, it would be no better than picking up a random rock. Similarly, for the heavily armored knight, war hammers and spiked hammers were also jokingly called canopeners. The vibrations and shockwaves from these hammers could kill a knight even if he was in perfect armor. Actually, demons with magic armor could also be viewed as a type of super heavy armor unit, which was why it was best to use canopeners against them. The Snake Archduchess' first attack with her warhammer was doubtlessly a type of test, but since her warhammer was barely at the myth level, she herself didn't have much hope. For powerful individuals who had survived for a long period of time, collecting information on their opponents had become a daily habit. Any kind of targeted investigation was a necessary process when dealing with powerful enemies. Doing so would be tantamount to suicide. In fact, this was similar to how players had to look up guides and watch videos when fighting a raid. Of course, it was also fine if you didn't look at the enemy's information at all. You could simply use repeated deaths and team annihilations to find out the enemy's abilities. But in reality, you only had one life. A new hero starts all over again only existed in the game. And so, for truly powerful individuals, the competition would begin before the battle even began. If all their information was leaked, they would be killed sooner or later. This was commonly known as long as you have information, you'll be killed sooner or later. Without information, you'll be invincible. Or, to put it another way, without a guide, without any preparations, you'll be a trailblazer. If you have a guide, experience, and preparations, you'll be a fast grinder. Both sides are on completely different levels of difficulty. Everyone wanted to hide their information. However, powerful individuals who had reached a certain level of power would often have their strengths and weaknesses set in stone. As long as there was a record of their attacks, it would be nearly impossible to completely hide their information. However, They would definitely have an ace up their sleeves. Unless the difference in power was so great that it was impossible to completely suppress them, it would still be a competition of trump cards. The undead had indeed investigated me and made preparations. They had also deduced that I might have a hidden ace up my sleeve. In the past, I had only shown off my sword saint-level swordsmanship, outstanding ice magic, and God's descent ability. As for holy light, undead magic, and the like, I had no battle records to prove it. No matter if it was holy light or undead magic, any path would require a lifetime of experience and time to pursue. If one wasn't completely sincere, they wouldn't even be able to face their own desires. It was likely that they wouldn't even be able to form a legend's soul imprint, unless they were reborn. Fine then, my resurrection would probably be different from other undying individuals. At the very least, I didn't believe that any other existence would be able to maintain their true self in the river Styx. I can prove my sword saint sword techniques, as well as the frightening forbidden spell Iceon. I also need to be on guard against ice magic. Of course, there's also the undead emperor's signature undead magic. As for holy light, there's no battle records. Holy light itself also conflicts with the power of death. It's probably just a political method to obtain the Holy Church's favor. If it were me, I would probably make such a judgment as well. However, sometimes, some people couldn't be judged by common sense. At the very least, judging from their previous performance, they had indeed prepared quite well. The female blood tribe member before me was as slippery as a snake. She could casually use the ultimate techniques of the warrior monks from over 100 different schools of thought. Her agility stat had probably long since surpassed 30. I, a sword saint, was as clumsy as a monkey waving a banana in front of her. Meanwhile, that curse mage only used a single fatigue curse on me, which caused my stamina to increase exponentially. My sweat under my armor already smelled like blood. And, as long as I tried to kill that troublesome bald curse mage, she would keep me busy, even at the expense of being injured. And at this time, the blood tribe's regenerative abilities were truly disgusting. As for that assassin who cosplayed as a death god, he would instantly vanish and regroup after missing his attack. From start to finish, I was only attacked by him without being able to counterattack. Not only that, I had to be on guard, which made me feel more and more depressed. I had already confirmed that all three of them had plenty of ice resistance magical equipment on them. My large-scale ice attacks were restricted. If I tried to cast an incantation, the blood tribe warrior monks wouldn't give me a chance to do so. As for casting death magic, let's not even talk about whether or not they were prepared. Undead creatures powered by negative energy would either absorb or resist ordinary undead magic. Right now, I didn't have any top-level undead magic that a myth-ranked undead creature couldn't resist. My sword techniques were nothing more than an unskilled apprentice in front of the Snake Archduchess, who had trained hard for over 1,000 years. I never expected that my ice magic would encounter so many ice resistance magical equipment. If this had happened 2 months ago, I probably would have died from such a direct attack. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, in my previous battles, I had fought against undead Emperor Asso and the Titan Giants. Both battles had made me dance close to death, and I had also discovered my own shortcomings. Every time I fought a battle, I liked to reflect on my mistakes. This would allow me to do better next time. But if Asso had gone all out against me, or if the Titan Giants had directly ambushed me, no matter how perfect my performance was, I would likely have met the same fate. I can't always hope to be lucky. There will be more and more opponents of this level in the future. At the very least, I need to think of a way to survive. Only by surviving will I have a chance at victory, and only then will I have a chance at using my trump card to turn the tables. Reality proved my choice. These 3 veteran myth-ranked undead creatures were more than capable of suppressing me in terms of pure power level. If it wasn't for the fact that I had this metal armor, I probably would have been instantly killed. Dragon Scale Ice Armor, Guardian of Yungyea. System Evaluation, Legend, Can Grow. Titan Giants Thunder Metal. This armor has legendary level damage reduction. 30 God Equipment. Any damage dealt by any weapon below God Equipment will be reduced by 30 points. System Notification, You actually embedded a shard of the Titan Giant's shield into this armor to increase its defense. Only you could think of something like this. Ein Mez's protection. The dragon's bloodline flows within the armor. She is protecting the wearer of the armor. However, this isn't good news for the attacker. After all, this means that the wearer has to absorb at least 100 points of damage every day in order to be able to deal any damage to the wearer. This ability will automatically repair itself. The repair will be completed within 24 hours. The agile warrior monks were indeed my natural nemesis in melee combat. However, his high-speed bare-handed attacks and high agility made it so that his attacks didn't deal much damage. In front of this top-level armor, even his penetrative attacks were forcefully reduced by more than half. Plus, I had my own damage reduction, so the actual damage dealt was only around 30% to 40%. In order to deal with such an armor, I would have to use a god equipment can open a battle hammer, or use a top-level forbidden spell to directly attack the soul. However, neither of these would be easy to deal with. With this armor, I'll at least be undefeatable. Actual combat had already proven my choice. If I only focused on defense, I would die sooner or later. Stamina exhaustion and small injuries would also be fatal. I was able to hold on for so long, not only because of the Dragonblood battle armor's astonishing defense, but also because Arabella was helping me to take care of my injuries. The shield slime in the armor acted as a second layer of defense, and the life slime was also helping me to clean up the clotted blood and heal my injuries. Thus, I barely managed to achieve a balance between offense and defense. Although it seemed like it was a 1v3, in a way, it was still a 3v3. While the undead were vexed about not being able to defeat me, I was also vexed about not being able to deal any effective damage. Even though I was undefeatable, it seemed impossible for me to achieve victory. The undead were unable to open my can opener, and I was unable to deal any effective damage to them. It would seem that I can only use the second method. For the holy light, I reached out with my hand again. This time, I didn't take out my ice crystal magic sword. Instead, I took out my Holy Knight silver battle hammer. Myth-ranked weapon, Undying Slayer, fake, attack power, 40 to 40, 10 holy light. Speed, extremely slow. Special effect 1, Undead Butcher. All undead that are hit by this attack have a certain chance of being instantly annihilated. Special effect 2, Divine Protection. Summon a golden holy domain to defend against the invasion of evil. Duration of 30 seconds. All invaders will receive 5 points of holy light damage per second. Special effect 3, Divine Power. When facing against undead, the user's strength +2, limited to holy knight. Special effect 4, Divine Fury. You can enchant this battle hammer, increasing holy damage by 10. Hammer, limited to holy knight. There's a line of twisted silver words on the handle of this battle hammer. This battle hammer once belonged to a true holy knight. Only a true holy knight will be able to utilize the full power of this battle hammer. System notification. Instead of being a sword saint, do you really want to be a hammer saint? Comrade Luo Dachui. If your opponent was an ordinary person, this battle hammer would probably be an excellent weapon. But if your opponent was an undead, it would definitely be no weaker than a god equipment. After Harlois devoured this holy hammer, she also gained the ability to transform into this form. But if she chose to transform into this form, she would have to enter a state of complete hibernation in order to prevent her soul from being damaged. She wasn't compatible enough with this form. However, the undead below were all astonished. How could an undead emperor use holy light? The previous semigod undead emperor had used holy light to deal with myth-ranked undead. Wasn't this a little too much of a joke? Who would have thought that it was possible to combine the power of holy light and the power of death? The Holy Church had done everything it could to suppress the news of what had happened in the Northlands. In their eyes, even if I could use holy light now that I had only used undead magic, it would only be an illusion created by using some tools. Such high purity of holy light. How is this possible? Everyone knew that the purity of a holy knight's holy light was directly related to one's faith. The purer the holy light, the more damage it would deal to the undead and demons. That was why demons and devils would think of all sorts of ways to make a holy knight fall. And the more devout a holy knight was, the more powerful the fallen Black Knight would be. This holy light, which seemed to have physical substance, had already surpassed the understanding of the undead calamity. Who would have imagined that an undead emperor would actually have such a devout faith in the holy light? A holy battle hammer, sturdy armor, and eye-catching holy light and holy flames. This was an undead killer, a holy knight. As for me, I felt as if I had returned to the past. I suddenly spread my wings and stood in midair, looking down at the undead below me. I waved my hand, and the entire sky was filled with falling feathers. Every single feather was a bomb infused with holy light. Holy flames covered the entire sky. At this moment, it was as if the sky was raining holy light. After cleansing my own bloodline, my war angel form had also evolved and strengthened. And in this form, my greatest improvement was in my pure power of order. All of you shall be reduced to ashes by the flames of holy light. My golden wings faintly glowed with holy fire. The golden feathers flashed in the sky, and any undead that came into contact with the feathers instantly melted as they wailed in agony. The boss is in the sky. It's time for the second mode. Everyone, get to your preset positions to avoid the AoE attacks. The AoE countdown is counting down, 3, 2, 1. Mudun, that white bone lick, you ran in the wrong direction. As expected, you're dead. The leader of the Lich job class, deduct his guild points. The silly cat isn't here, so it's rather boring for me to comment on myself. Did you just realize that you're super boring? What kind of boss commands a raid by itself? Do you want me to act as the DBM, boss battle alarm plugin? System notification, 5 justice points have been deducted. Thank you for your patronage. Chapter 387. Firewall, 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 firewall. The boss has landed. Main tank, take over. Pay attention to your positioning. Those who die during the AoE, go stand in a corner. Those who OT and those who tread on fire should report to the second team leader tomorrow. Our elite team doesn't take any trash with us. You haven't had enough of this joke yet. The AoE phase has ended. So many undead have died. Comrade Big Hammer Luo has landed. Whoops, no, he's now taking out a second hammer. He's holding a hammer in each hand. He's changed job class to Luo 2 Hammer. 1 hammer, he sent the Snake Archduchess flying with just 1 hammer strike. Use your unparalleled skills, Luo 2 Hammer. System notification, I'm tired of playing DBM. Female game streamers are the trend now. Awesome, right? Where's your reward? Shut up. This isn't a hammer. Fine, maybe it's not wrong to call it a hammer. I was rendered speechless by my system's shameless behavior. Actually, what I took out right now wasn't a battle hammer. However, it looked quite similar. Even if you insisted on calling it a hammer, I wouldn't be able to refute that. I took out a silver oak branch that was nearly 2 meters long. There were some flowers at the top, and just the branch alone gave off a green glow. The unique fragrance in the air also made me feel refreshed. The root of the mother tree of dreams, the purest source of the forest of dreams. It contains limitless amounts of life energy. It's a natural wonder comparable to the first sprout of the tree of life. It's incredibly precious and currently has no rating. System notification. In a way, the mother tree is Amelia's true body. You're holding the mother tree's root in your hand, and the girl's lower body hair is beast. It's one thing for other people to F*ck a ship, a sword, or a city, but you F*ck a tree. You Bayfoam. Shut up. Will you die if you don't lose your integrity? Also, since when did Bayfoam become a pervert? Ever since the day he became a banned word. Right, since he's wanted by all the Druil organizations, he's also on the calamity rankings. Congratulations, you're the first subordinate to be on the calamity rankings. I don't know him, really. Cough cough, getting back to the main topic, the log in my hand is no ordinary item. The Tree of Life was regarded as the origin of the elves, and the wood spirits were similar existences. The Tree of Life and the primal wood of dreams were both miraculous ancient trees that contained the power of life. The Tree of Life's branches could be turned into divine weapons on par with legendary tier weapons after some slight modification. The branches of the Tree of Life weren't easy to deal with, but because they contained life power, not only could they amplify life spells, but they also had a miraculous effect on the undead, so they were naturally a very good material for undead weapons. As a matter of fact, there was indeed a guy who used the branch of the World Tree as a warhammer and made an immortal achievement. However, there were less than 100 ancient Tree of Life weapons left in the world. Because taking them would cause damage to the ancient Tree of Life, unless one had made a contribution that was beneficial to the entire elven race, there was no need to even think about taking them. Considering that all the ancient trees of life in the kingdom of the elves were from the third generation, Cavendish had destroyed one of the only second-generation ancient trees of life over 300 years ago, and I had destroyed one of the second-generation ancient trees of life over 100 years ago, it would be quite difficult to obtain any ancient trees of life. Amelia's primal wood of dreams was a miraculous tree on par with the elves' first-generation ancient trees of dreams. Since I met her, I had long since asked Rosa and the others to give me a primal wood of dreams as research material. Of course, I also agreed to give them the residue of a second-generation ancient tree of life as a gift. This was a mega-rare ancient tree of life that couldn't even be found in the kingdom of the elves. Well, there was no need to ask where she got it from. From a certain standpoint, the three virtues had gone slightly overboard. After I won the battle against the Titan giants, they gave me this primal wood of dreams as a reward. Obviously, there was something fishy about this. In fact, this had even damaged the very foundation of the Forest of Dreams and slowed down Amelia's recovery speed. But for the three virtues, this wasn't a threat at all. It didn't matter even if she revived a bit slower. After paying such a high price, this primal wood of dreams Mother Tree of Dreams root was definitely the wood with the most abundant life energy. It was even possible to craft it into a god equipment or semi-god equipment. This log hadn't been in my possession for very long, but its quality was at least 10 times better than that of the third-generation World Tree of Dreams branch. I hadn't had the time to research it yet, but now that I remembered that my opponents were undead, I figured that I could use it as a weapon, so I casually took it out. And so, I held a two-handed hammer in my left hand and a log branch in my right hand. I became row 2 hammers, a dual-wielding berserker. Why didn't I toss down holy flame feathers in the air for the second stage? Why did I still have to fight in melee? Well, let's not even talk about how much damage these slow feather bombs could deal to these top-level undead, and the holy flame-covered feather bombs had a price as well. If I continued to use them, I would become a bald chicken. Cough, cough. Getting back to the main topic, after I discovered that the feather bombs could only be used to clear out the undead, I naturally landed on the ground after I obtained a powerful melee weapon to deal with the undead. It's now P3, the third stage. I had already practiced dual-wielding swords before. As long as I had enough strength, it wouldn't be too difficult for me to use my hammers as swords. However, the results were even better than I had expected. What's this? My curse has been dispelled. The moment I held it in my hand, a green radiance emitted from it, dispelling the Baldy's annoying curse of exhaustion. The abundant life force also greatly boosted my spirits. The wounds on my body and the stamina I had used up were quickly replenished. The steel-silver warhammer was filled with golden holy light, while the wooden log was filled with green life force. Greatly energized, my hands danced in the air, and the sky was filled with hammer after images. Golden and green light filled the entire space. These were ultra-pure holy light and incredibly high-grade life energy. These two types of power were the pillars of the power of order. The former was the specialty of Holy Knight and Holy Light priests, while the latter was the research field of Druil and the Life priests. Under my control, Holy Light would occasionally transform into a giant hammer. Sometimes, it would cover the ground like a torrential downpour. In reality, it would transform into bolts of lightning. As for the life energy, it could only be used on its own. After all, I didn't have Druil to support me. No matter what type of power of order it was the undead's mortal enemy. The difference between being enveloped by holy light and life energy was probably the difference between being melted by the holy light and being purified into ashes, or being returned to dust and reincarnated by the life energy. Unfortunately, no matter how powerful my attacks were, they would only be effective if they hit the target. Although my attack power had greatly increased, the combat results were no different from before. Apart from the fact that the Snake Archduchess had been hit by my hammer at the beginning of the dive attack, she actually moved even faster. She actually managed to dodge all of my attacks that I converted into holy light. Punish, judge, purify this rotten and evil black soil. Through my feet, I poured holy light into the ground, transforming the entire ground into a holy land covered in holy flames. The undead that got close to me howled in pain as they were reduced to ashes. This was the holy flame offering spell that I was already so familiar with. It was a large-scale AoE attack that specifically targeted high-dexterity opponents and large groups of enemies. 1 second before the holy light was ignited, Snake Archduchess Alexandra spread her blood-red wings and began to glide in the air, dodging the holy flames that came from the ground. Hammer of Holy Light. The Holy Light War Hammer shattered in midair, its explosive light transforming the dark night into day. Several greatsword skeletons and large rotten zombies that came into contact with it were instantly reduced to ashes. The Snake Archduchess, who had been my first target, actually dodged the attack as if she was shrinking into the ground. She then forcefully punched me in the stomach, making me want to vomit blood. Chains of Holy Light, Light's Judgment, Crystal Ball of Light, and so on. All of the Holy Knight's classic combat techniques were perfectly used, but the results were the same. Her entire body twisted as if she didn't have any bones. Sometimes, her joints would twist, and sometimes, her limbs would lengthen and shorten. When I looked closely, I discovered that her eyes had transformed into snake eyes, and her vertical pupils were staring directly at me. What kind of joke is this? She's deducing my attack style just by looking at my eyes. That's ridiculous. At this moment, I finally confirmed that the existence before me had probably reached the peak of martial arts. The best visual acuity, the fastest reflexes, a body with no bones or joints, and well-practiced martial arts. How could she cheat like this? If this was an online game, she would probably be a player at max level with top-notch mechanics. There would be an absolute difference in combat techniques, and I, a noob who hadn't even reached max level yet, would be unable to hit her at all. Since I'm being locked onto by her eyes, I just need to close my eyes. And so, I closed my eyes and prepared to randomly punch her to death, but then, I immediately opened my eyes in just a short 10 seconds. In that short instant, the overjoyed Snake Archduchess gave me 72 trigrams palms. Fine, I was just making things up. I didn't know exactly how many times I was hit, but judging from the pain, it was at least 3 digits. It would seem that there was still a difference between what people said and what they said. If I randomly punched her in real combat, I would only be beaten up by her. But just as I stopped asking for death and used my war hammer and tree branch to block her attacks, my tree branch accidentally clashed with my war hammer. Asterisk clang. Asterisk there was a clear sound that sounded like a copper bell. At the same time, the tree branch glowed with a brilliant green light. The overflowing power of life furiously flowed out, transforming into a green halo that spread out and devoured everything before it. This time, the green halo came so suddenly and quickly that the Snake Archduchess who was chasing me had no way of dodging it. She was suddenly enveloped by the green light. She immediately stopped as if she was dizzy. Meanwhile, the warrior monks had frighteningly strong willpower to begin with. The next second, his murky eyes began to clear up. But how could I possibly give her a chance? Home run. The tree branch I swung out transformed into a baseball bat with tremendous force. The Snake Archduchess was sent flying backwards, never to get back up again. And when the Snake Archduchess, who had been able to deal with me by herself, collapsed, it was as if the main tank of a team fighting a boss had fallen. The tank fell, the tank fell. How did you heal me? Main healer, deduct guild points for me. What? No main healer? Then deduct the main tank. You didn't even battle resurrect. Forget it, we won't be able to defeat this boss with our team composition. You're just a bunch of idiots. Today's event is over. I'm going to go home and read up on strategies. Now that everyone is running out of the dungeon, you deserve it if you're too slow. You won't be reimbursed for the repair and funeral fees. Are you done yet? Beep, this battle has ended. It has lasted for 12 minutes. 17 people have died. Repair fees of 2000 G. System notification. So what if I recharge my system's plugin? Bite me if you're unhappy. Fine, I obviously couldn't bite her. But the fact that my system could do whatever it wanted meant that the battle was nearing its end. The snake archduchess fell to the ground, unconscious. The Baldy's curse had been nullified in front of the ancient tree. Only the assassin was left, and it was impossible for the undead to win. Without hesitation, they abandoned their teammates and began to run for their lives. Then, I looked at the spoils of war in front of me. I felt that as a boss who had successfully annihilated the enemy, it was time for me to say something. In front of me, Luo Chue. I mean Roland, your beliefs are meaningless. Your armor isn't even worth mentioning. Technical players are nothing in front of money players. You've finally admitted that you're Luo Chue. Didn't you have so much fun playing? That's enough. I finally understood what it felt like to have someone comment on the side while I was fighting. No matter how I tried, I was unable to get excited. My hot-blooded style suddenly became hilarious. My motivation was instantly gone. Even though this boss had fallen, I still felt like something was missing. Amdiroken, Spider God, and Demon Earl, I've let you down before. When has your style ever been normal? Harlois, you're awake. Yep, it's all thanks to your Luo Chue. This power of life is able to protect my soul. No, I should say that it's able to strengthen my soul. If you're free, lend it to me for some research. Strictly speaking, the current Harlois was already a living person who had broken through the cycle of reincarnation. However, the holy light which was based on purification was obviously still harsh on her, while the power of life was much more lenient. I was quite interested in this phenomenon, as there seemed to be many things worth investigating. However, now obviously wasn't the time for research. Just like how the police always arrived late in the movies, the Dragon Knight who had just descended from the sky filled me with resentment. Damn it. They arrived so timely, so they must be hiding in a corner to watch the show. See how I'm going to take advantage of them this time. Chapter 388. In novels and movies, the police and rescuers would always arrive late. But reality wasn't like novels. If people always arrived at the perfect time, that would be a huge problem. You guys must have had fun watching this show. The black-haired Dragon Knight before me was quite young. He appeared to be only 15 or 16 years old. His face was still flushed with embarrassment and sporadic pimples. Judging from how embarrassed he was, he didn't seem like an old fox who was capable of lying in front of others without batting an eyelid. I actually became bait. You actually dared to use me as bait. This was my first thought when I saw the Dragon Knight and his night guards arrive late. For example, when the 5 Dragon Knights suddenly flew overhead and chased after the fleeing undead, they left behind the weakest undead who had obviously not even reached adulthood to greet me. Not only that, this undead was the weakest and had obviously not even reached adulthood yet. Not only that, this undead only needed to set up a few traps to reveal most of my information. Actually, I already knew the answer without even having to interrogate this little brat. Today's incident was far too coincidental. I refused to believe that Aulus's control over his own capital city would be so weak. Nor did I believe that his top-secret information would be leaked so easily. If it really was leaked to the undead so quickly, the most likely reason would be that Aulus had done it on purpose. He intentionally leaked the information that I already possessed the Formula 4 Asso's gift to the already exposed undead spies. Then, he lured the undead to ambush me. For the undead hiding in the Bardi capital city, no matter if they killed me or obtained the formula from me, it would be a highly profitable transaction. It would be an irresistible temptation to take any risk. And so, even though the undead knew that it was highly likely that this was a trap, they unhesitatingly took the bait since they would be able to recoup their losses. And so, what if I died? For the Bardi Empire, there would naturally be no more threats. Wasn't that a good thing? It's truly a win-win situation. This time, the Dragon Knight guards who just happened to arrive could only wait outside and wait for the undead and me to heavily injure each other so that they could take advantage of the situation. Of course, if I won, they would probably come to my rescue. Aulus truly deserved his nickname of Venomous Scorpion for being able to think of such a win-win situation in such a short amount of time and finish setting it up in less than 2 hours. You must have been tricked. I let Glyna out. Even if I didn't tell her anything, she would be able to see through all of these messy plots. However, what made her even more upset was that she wasn't strong enough in battle, which was why she was a burden. Don't worry, I'll make that old man spit out everything he owes us. Don't think too much. You're still too young. Stroking the little fellow's head, Zhongxian looked into the distance. Even though the other party had escaped, it was clear that he hadn't cleaned up the mess yet. I casually tossed the unconscious snake Archduchess into my frigid winter earth right in front of that little dragon knight. Such a spoil of war could possibly reveal information about the undead's organization in the Bardi Empire. How could I possibly leave it for the Bardi Empire? The corpses of the undead weren't the only ones here. The human assassins who had attacked us earlier had been surrounded by the undead, and those who hadn't died hadn't managed to escape. Those who were still alive were probably the lucky ones. As for the living assassins who had been driven here, perhaps they were related to a certain prince. I would leave that to the Bardi Empire to deal with. Just as I was about to go to the royal palace to find that old fox to settle the score, Glyna suddenly tugged on my sleeve and pointed at a nearby tree. It seems that we don't need to go look for Beck's eldest daughter anymore. Wasn't a dark-skinned half-elf assassin trembling on a nearby tree? She was surrounded by irregular shadows. If it wasn't for Glyna's magical eyes, it would have been difficult for her to discover her. It would seem that she had used a dark elf racial talent to avoid danger. It would seem that she's most likely relying on Mills. Since she knows my password, it seems that I'll have to kill the elves to silence her. As I spoke, I poured holy light into my eyes. Killing intent flashed in my eyes as I glared at her. Stop scaring her. She looks like she's about to faint. I'm already regretting it. I think I peed my pants already. TSK, 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 it's dripping down the tree. That little brat will definitely complain to me. Glyna, let me discuss something with you. You want me to carry her? Don't even think about it. She'll dirty my mecha. No, I just want you to help her change into a new set of underwear. Here, this set should fit her quite well. Why don't you first explain why you're carrying women's underwear with you? Could it be that the legendary Princess Peach? It's unbearable to look back on the past. It's all the fault of being young. Hey, I'm really not a pervert. Don't run away. Your attitude really hurts your great-grandfather. As the mage country's ambassador, I was actually assassinated right in front of my own residence, suffering both mental and physical torture. Not only that, your country's security guards arrived so late. I seriously suspect that they did this on purpose or not. Not only is this a personal threat to me, it's an insult and provocation to my country. The old man before me still had a friendly smile on his face. But no matter how ridiculous my explanation was, it seemed that he was still acting like a mascot. Meanwhile, the diplomats and night guard were all furious at my rudeness. Even though it was already late at night, the glorious guest hall was still brightly lit. Judging from the bloodshot eyes of the attendees, the footprints on the floor that hadn't been cleaned yet, and the teacups that had been refilled countless times, perhaps it should be said that the Bardi Empire's conference hadn't ended, and that these people hadn't dispersed at all. That was indeed the case. Right after Aulus's conference with me ended, he received news that the Mills conference had been assassinated. Another emergency conference was held, but before the conference was even over, Aulus suddenly had an emergency conference with another visitor. Then, he immediately turned around and continued with the conference. This time, he was discussing all sorts of emergency plans. He even mentioned war plans. It could be said that these diplomats and civil officials had been busy for at least 14 hours now, dealing with the highest level of important matters. They were so nervous that their eyes were bloodshot. And when they discovered that I was the one who had caused all this trouble, they were naturally quite displeased with me. And right now, in their minds, I had just killed the popular Prince Mills in the middle of the street. Now, the guilty party was the first to complain and act so arrogantly in front of Emperor Aulus. In the feudal era of the Knight Society, this was already a great humiliation for the Bardi Empire. Hey, old man, I've said so much already. Shouldn't you at least have some reaction? Do you really think that I'm a little white rabbit who's going to swallow my anger? Impudent. Do you know who you're talking to? This is the Bardi Empire's Emperor Aulus, the guardian of the Mantis Mountains, and the Bardi Empire's Emperor Aulus. You. The common characteristic of all major figures was their long list of titles. It was quite frightening to say it out loud, especially to novices. These titles were a part of their authority, but it was likely that such a trick would be useless against an old fox like me. Cough. This is the Law God's envoy, the guardian of the seven Northlands Kingdom's sword, the last descendant of the mist, the child of the holy light, a member of the Mage Country's Truth Symposium, the destroyer of eternal night, the undying. Glyna also revealed a long list of titles. It seemed that she was quite observant. Wasn't it just a competition of titles? Who was afraid of who? Who are you? Do you have the right to speak here? Are you a diplomat from the Mage Country? You little brat. A goateed official stood up and roared angrily. If I recalled correctly, he seemed to be the Bardi Empire's Prime Minister, and his name seemed to be Carlo. Indeed, this move of his was quite a clever one. Even if he lost in battle, he didn't lose in spirit. However, it seemed that the young female attendant he was using as an example seemed to have found the wrong person. Cough. This is Her Majesty the Queen of the Slewware Kingdom. As the Mist Alliance's full diplomatic envoy, I strongly protest against your insults towards our queen, and request that you, Carlo, immediately apologize. Not only that, our Mist Alliance's queen was attacked right after she arrived in your country. We need an explanation. This time, it was my turn to act all high and mighty. All the officials present were surprised at first, but then came to a sudden realization. I had never intended to hide my background. Considering my relationship with the Northlands countries, it was completely understandable that the Queen of a Slewware Kingdom would suddenly come here. However, my request was only natural. As a civil official, shouting angrily at a country's queen in a formal setting was a serious breach of diplomatic etiquette. Merely asking for an apology was already quite restrained. Of course, I could also consider using force. There were plenty of examples of large countries suppressing small countries. But right now, I was in front of His Majesty, and His Majesty didn't say anything, so how could a civil official like him dare to make a decision for His Majesty? But at a time like this, if I lowered my head, I would obviously appear weak, which would affect my future negotiations. In the current delicate situation, such psychological factors were quite important. And not apologizing would cause serious diplomatic consequences. Just as the hesitant Carlo was about to bow down, Aulus, who had been acting like an ornament all this time, finally spoke up. Your Highness Roland, it's better to be honest about some things. Just what do you want? Compensation, physical compensation, and psychological damages. Talking about money would be too vulgar. How about a dozen or so dragon knights first? If that's not possible, then full information on your country's specialty Bardi dragon berserkers and shield dragon guardians would also be fine. Just like the Ottoman Royal Knights' elite White Wolf Guards, Donglan's Aurora Knight, and Avalanche Defenders, Bardi also had its own mass-produced ace troop types. Dragon berserkers were said to be killing machines that had an average power level of silver-ranked, while shield dragon guardians were said to be super defenders capable of fighting against sword saints. Information on these two troop types were the Bardi Empire's foundational treasures. How could Bardi casually give them to others? Thieves. You actually dare. It was always hateful to open one's mouth like a lion. For a moment, angry shouts and reprimands filled my ears, but I ignored them. Of course, I knew that Aulus wouldn't take out such an important treasure as compensation, nor would he use the Dragon Knight as compensation. But wasn't negotiation the same as haggling on the streets? Even if I knew that you wouldn't accept, I still had to lower the price by half to test my bottom line. Only when both sides faintly understood each other's bottom line would we enter the actual negotiation stage. But to everyone's surprise, Aulus smiled and nodded. All right, is that all? Sure, I'll compensate you with everything. Chapter 389. If you were haggling with a store on the street and you said, "Give me this ring for 100 gold coins." But if the seller clearly knew that this ring was worth at least 1,000 gold coins, and he still said, "Sure, I'll give it to you, and I'll even give you a gift." How would you feel? In a normal situation, you would either feel that there was something wrong with the ring itself, or that the seller had some ulterior motive, or that the seller was plotting something against you. That was probably how I felt right now. Apart from that, I also felt like I had swung a heavy club but hit nothing but cotton. I had prepared so many tricks, so why did I give in so easily? Berserk dragon warriors were the pinnacle of alchemy and draconic studies. They were artificially created dragon followers. Without Bardi's thousands of years of accumulation and extraordinary relationship with the dragons, it would have been impossible for Berserk dragon warriors to exist. It was said that these Berserk dragon warriors were born with tremendous physical strength, 18+ strength. They could wear super heavy armor that no ordinary person would be able to wear. They were also equipped with giant dragon spears and axes that were more than 3 meters long. The moment they entered the battlefield, they would become unstoppable killing machines. The dragon bloodline's natural defensive scales and regenerative abilities gave these killing machines powerful endurance and recovery abilities on the battlefield. And if they were in danger, the dragon bloodline's desire for power would often give them limitless potential. Continuing to dragon transform would give them new power and even stronger basic stats. Of course, forcefully adding dragon bloodlines also had some irresistible weaknesses. The Berserk Dragon's Berserk Dragon served as a reminder to these valiant warriors that if they became obsessed with killing, they would forever lose the possibility of returning to their human forms and hearts. Dragon Berserk warriors who returned from the cruelest of battlefields would either uncontrollably transform into monsters or become insane lunatics. On the other hand, the Dragon Shield Defender was a completely different category. If the Dragon Warrior was the sharpest flame spear, then the Dragon Shield Defender was the strongest ice shield. However, unlike the Berserk Dragon Warriors, who had abnormally obvious physical traits, these heavily armored and heavily shielded Berserk Dragon Warriors were all covered in armor. There wasn't much information on them, but as long as they appeared, they would usually achieve astonishing combat results. These Berserk Dragon Warriors were skilled in group battles. In fact, there were even small teams of 3 to 5 that successfully slaughtered giants. Their shields were 2 meters tall, and as long as they were set up, they could form a magical defensive barrier. Just a small team would be able to provide a defense similar to that of a city wall, and they were known as mobile city walls. However, you would get what you paid for. It was said that the armor and enchanted shields were all top-level goods. Every warrior in the entire Bardi Empire would be fully equipped and trained, and they would be at the level of a top-level silver-ranked warrior. There were only about 20 combat squads in the entire Bardi Empire that were capable of fighting 80,000 people. Does it look like a lot? But if one considered the fact that Bardi was a mega empire, these 80,000 soldiers probably weren't even comparable to a domain lord's private army. That was why even the Bardi Empire didn't dare to use such expensive warriors in ordinary battles. In fact, the Bardi Empire wouldn't even give such an important national treasure to any prince apart from the crown prince. And now, as I flipped through the thick stack of training materials and alchemy recipes in my hands, I heard Harlois say, they should be real, or they should be research results of the same level. I felt as if I was in a dream, and the tyrant who had just berated his ministers by shouting, "Give it to him," I said, "Give it to him," was now sitting in front of a table, smiling at me. One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. All the unimportant people had been chased away. There were now only 5 people at the table, all of whom I was familiar with, myself, Glyna, Aulus, and Halent, an old butler of the royal family. I reflexively raised my guard as I looked at Aulus, who was smiling as if he were a profiteer who had just made a fortune. I didn't believe that a simple gift from Asso would be enough to make him lose his footing and obediently listen to my extortion. Never compromise with terrorists was a common rule in any world. This wasn't because a mega empire didn't want to give up on a bargaining chip. It was because greed was boundless. Nobody knew whether or not the terrorists would increase the price, and whether or not they would be more enthusiastic about their next plan due to their temporary success. And if such a compromise was announced, it would be a direct blow to the country's reputation, as well as exposing the country's weaknesses and inadequacies. And in the international world where the law of the jungle prevailed, Exposing a country's weakness would attract greedy wolves. Next time, they wouldn't be ordinary terrorists. Judging from how I'll spread the word Resident Evil if you don't give me money, my actions this time could be categorized as such. In that case, Aulus's compromise was quite incomprehensible. It wasn't that he shouldn't have compromised, but at the very least, he wouldn't have so easily handed over such an important treasure that was obviously a scam. If it were me, even if I would compromise in the end, I would have tried various methods to make the threat disappear. And even if I accepted Aulus's conditions, I would have made an additional request that forbade any additional conditions from being offered, in order to resolve everything once and for all. I know that you're confused, but I've actually always been grateful to you. I know that you've made many achievements in alchemy research, and that you have many dragons as allies. Treat this information as a small gift from me. Aulus started off with such a sentence, but I already knew what he was going to say. After all, Evelyn had once mentioned to me that Aulus seemed to be very grateful to me for helping him escape from Asso's threat. However, what he said next was completely unexpected. What I'm grateful for isn't only about the undead. When I learned from Miss Evelyn that you lost your memories, I was quite astonished. Perhaps I should tell you about the seed I left behind back in the day. Amoy. The elderly butler was wearing formal attire, and his face was covered in wrinkles. He seemed quite old, but he reached out with his hand, and golden light gathered in his hand, transforming into a ball of holy light that illuminated the room. This is impossible. Pure holy light wouldn't lie. This was indeed an outstanding holy night. But what astonished me was that not only did Amoy not chant the name of holy light, he didn't even have the god of holy light's emblem on him. This was obviously against the god of holy light's teachings. In the past, before I used holy light, I would always praise the holy light or pretend to move my lips. This was all so that I would appear no different from other holy knights. And in a way, Amoy's method of using holy light was quite similar to mine. He didn't chant the name of holy light. First-generation Pope, you guessed correctly. Our southern sect doesn't worship the god of holy light. We worship holy light itself. In the eyes of the Holy Church, we're heretics that should be eradicated the most. While I was astonished at the content of Amoy's words, I was even more astonished at the strange way he addressed me. Lady Evelyn also mentioned that you lost your memories of your time in Bardi. Perhaps as the sixth pope of the southern sect and your successor, I should mention your glorious achievements from back in the day, and so, as Amoy sighed, the dust-covered past was gradually revealed. The southern sect's official name was the Church of Pure Holy Light. In the eyes of the Holy Church's higher-ups, they were probably just a sect that had some differences in understanding of the Holy Church's teachings. However, only the core members of the southern sect would know that the differences in understanding weren't small. The southern sect didn't worship the god of holy light, they worshipped the purest form of holy light. The southern sect originated from the Bardi capital. The founder of the southern sect was Baron Blackhand, who went by the alias of Roland Blackhand. The southern sect's establishment was greatly supported by the Bardi royalty back in the day. Ever since the southern sect's founding, its founder had given it a unique mission: to spread the true teachings of holy light and replace the holy church that was becoming more and more corrupt by the day. Right now, the southern sect has more than 200,000 worshippers. They're scattered all over Bardi and the various countries. They travel through time in the name of the holy church, but what they spread is the purest teachings of holy light. Actually, apart from our understanding of holy light, there's no obvious difference between us and ordinary holy light priests. In fact, I'm even the former archbishop of the Bardi diocese of the Holy Church. That's precisely why the old pope didn't risk everything to start a holy war. After all, in their eyes, evil must die, but heretics must die even more. Although it didn't seem like much of a difference whether one believed in holy light or the god of holy light, the practical implications were tremendous. If the god of holy light was recognized as an omnipotent god of holy light, then the Holy Church would naturally receive his recognition. But if the Holy Church only recognized the existence of holy light and believed that holy light was the source of all power, an existence that didn't have a personality, then the Holy Church would naturally lose all of its divine authority and become a group of thieves who deceived the world. In fact, It would even be possible to question the God of Holy Light's true existence as a God of Holy Light. This was the foundational reason why heretics were far more dangerous than evil. This was also why Roland's exhibition in the Northlands had caused countless Holy Light job class members to waver in their beliefs. To the Holy Church, this was an even scarier threat than the Holy War itself. That was why after the Cardinals held an emergency conference, the entire Bardi Empire was viewed as a heretic country. Since there was such a major difference in the Holy Church's teachings, starting a holy war was the only option. Without a doubt, the Bardi Empire, which had already been declared a heretic by the Holy Church, was the origin of the heretical Bardi Empire. Not only that, the Bardi Empire was their natural ally. After the Bardi Empire completely broke off with the Holy Church, and a large number of Holy Light job class members were exiled from Bardi, the Holy Light job class members who stayed behind for personal reasons already established a new Southern Church. The pure teachings of Holy Light were now openly spreading. The seeds that Roland had sown back then were already beginning to sprout. Even though I no longer had any memories of the past, just thinking about it made me feel like this was exactly what Roland had done back then. Back then, Roland was someone who had been betrayed by the Holy Light. He was someone who had been filled with hatred for the Holy Light. He was an evil who had been stripped of all his honor. Yet, he still retained his Holy Knight powers. Just this alone was enough to shake the Holy Church's authority. It would be incredibly difficult to destroy a Holy Church by forcefully suppressing it from the outside. However, internal disagreements and heresy would be the most fatal. And so, Roland had sown a seed in Bardi. Although he didn't know if it would sprout, he wouldn't lose anything by doing it. Your prophecies have all been verified. As the major events recorded in the Holy Bible's revelation were verified one after another, our faith became even more devout, and the doubters returned to being devout. When evil prevailed over justice, we went into hiding as you requested. Fortunately, just as you said in your prophecy, the misfortune in your prophecy can be avoided through our own hard work. At the very least, we've managed to avoid the countless undead portals opening up in the Bardi Empire. Since I wanted to spread my teachings, how could I possibly miss out on the most useful prophet status? I would be able to casually write a series of prophecies, and the Holy Church that treated prophecies as holy scriptures would naturally gain the Holy Church's trust and gradually become stronger. This was also within Roland's expectations. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to pretend to be a god and make prophecies. Actually, the current Roland was still doing the same thing. He was sowing seeds everywhere. Even he didn't know if they would sprout or not. But now, what he was facing was no longer an immature seed. Instead, he was facing a towering tree that had already experienced 200 years of wind and rain and was gradually maturing. When the undead rampaged through the Bardi Empire, the Southern Sect became Aulus's trump card and most trustworthy target. The Holy Knight and Holy Light priests were the final vanguard against the undead. This was also the reason why Aulus was thanking me. At this moment, Glyna and Halent were looking at me as if I were a monster. After all, several hundred years of planning and 100% accurate prophecies were far beyond their comprehension. These examples would be treated as myths and epics if they were told in legends, but the actual person involved was right in front of them. We believe that our prophet will be able to defeat the evil lurking in the shadows. Actually, Her Majesty Empress Halent didn't mention the most important title, the founder of the Southern Sect, our most devout prophet and guide. What you did in the Northlands 2 days ago made our faith even more devout. We've also begun to openly spread our faith in the Bardi Empire. Perhaps this is the reason why those false god churches that steal the authority of the Holy Light are so angry. All right then, Pope Roland's eyes were filled with devoutness. He believed that this was a part of fate. He believed that the prophecy's final judgment would eventually arrive, and that as long as he worked hard, he would be able to reverse all misfortune. However, I was certain that this wasn't the same for Aulus. From the standpoint that a good sword only needed one master, just my relationship with the Southern Sect made my existence seem like an eyesore. Perhaps Aulus's current gift was indeed an apology. If I couldn't pass this test, perhaps today would be the day of my death. And at this moment, Aulus, as the master, smiled. All right, Let's not talk about such trivial matters for now. In order to show our sincerity in forming an alliance, let's reintroduce ourselves. This is Archduke Halent. Actually, he should be called Halent Milan. He's my nephew, as well as the only legitimate successor to the throne of the Bardi Empire. He's the future Bardi Emperor. Chapter 390. From a certain standpoint, the bloodline of a major country's royalty was usually a terrible thing to deal with. But now, it seemed that Bardi's was especially terrible. A necrophilic prince, Lily, a half-dead with no heir, a crazy witch in a vegetative state. I never expected that there would be someone like Beifong who had sought out the dragons. If someone told me that this family and kingdom had been cursed before, I would definitely believe it, no matter if others believed it or not. However, the true successor to the throne had always been hidden from the public eye. The Dragon Knight Archduke had always been treated as someone unrelated to the royalty. From a certain standpoint, it could only be said that Aulus had made far too many preparations, and that his intelligence work was quite excellent. What? Halent himself was the most astonished of all. Judging from his shocked expression, it didn't seem like he was faking it. I apologize. Although I've never told you before, you're indeed my nephew. Let's discuss the specifics in private. We're in front of our esteemed guests, so we can't let them laugh at us. All right then, it seemed that Aulus had done a good job of hiding the truth from him. Those idiots who've been blinded by power, wealth, and lust won't be able to succeed me. I can also tell you the truth that you're not my only choice. Even if you're my nephew, I still won't entrust the crown to you if you can't reach the standard of inheriting the throne. But judging from the current situation, no matter if it's your accomplishments in Night Rain City, or those idiots who think I'm about to die, you're the only choice. I suppose I can tell you now. I felt even sadder for those princes as I listened to Aulus's confident laughter. Actually, if one looked at the results, there were signs that Halent had made this choice long ago. Currently, the Bardi Empire's political situation was unstable, and all the domain lords were getting restless. Only those with military authority would have the most authority. And as the battle at Night Rain City continued, the most powerful warlord in the Bardi Empire was now Halent himself. As long as Halent could produce a good enough performance in Night Rain City, he would be the strongest contender for the crown even without the old emperor's guarantee. From a certain standpoint, the old emperor was raising poisonous insects, allowing his successors to fight each other like poisonous insects before choosing the successor that he admired the most. I don't believe that the emperor only had Halent as a candidate, but it's clear that old Aulus likes her the most. Perhaps it was precisely because he had always opposed the undead and insisted on putting national affairs first during the internal strife of the royal family, even going so far as to go against the emperor, that he finally won the emperor's favor. With such a commotion, not only would they be able to select the best successor, but they would also be able to expose those ambitious schemers. Since the emperor had died, the domain lords who had long been dissatisfied with him would definitely cause a commotion. It would be better to treat this memorial ceremony as a celebration for the new emperor. I'm afraid blood will flow like a river. This was my prediction, and I was quite confident in my prediction. After all, there were enough ambitious and unlucky individuals who died, and the new emperor's position was becoming more and more stable. Rather than waiting for those fellows to cause a ruckus after the emperor's death, I might as well kill them all first. With the old emperor's explanation, we had two members of the royal family with real authority at the conference table. Bardi had also brought out the current emperor, the future emperor, and the highest-ranking bishop of the Bardi Empire. This was already the highest-level conference, which showed the old emperor's sincerity in wanting to come to an agreement. Actually, I've always liked what you said at the Southern Sect. This world belongs to mortals, and those high-up gods are nothing but hypocritical fanatics. With this as the beginning, we began our conference. The contents of the conference became more and more important. By the time we barely managed to come to an agreement and returned home, a new sun had risen in the sky. Our all-night conference was a delightful one. Apart from the grand plan that the old emperor had been preparing for almost 10 years, we also obtained what we wanted the most as his helpers and allies. The grand plan? As expected of the greatest schemer in Bardi in the last 300 years. He's truly daring. But if this plan really succeeds, It wouldn't be wrong to call him the wisest ruler in the last 1,000 years. The ambitious and ruthless person who conspired with the grand scheme was quite generous. Since I agreed to help him with the grand scheme, he gave me a lot of benefits in other small aspects. 2 years' worth of food reserves in your province will be enough for all of Donglan to eat for 5 years. Right, 3,000 blacksmiths and alchemists, and 200 scholars with job titles. The old emperor casually agreed to all of my conditions. The foundations of an established empire like the Ottoman Empire were incomparable to the foundations of an established empire. Just the small gifts that the old emperor saw as gifts were enough to save the impoverished Northlands several decades of hard work. And when it came to what we wanted the most, the old emperor didn't hesitate at all. In that case, will the Northlands support the independence of the 7 Northlands? Of course. The Northlands will be able to rise to power because they'll be able to guard the borders of the entire human world. San Antonio's hand is too far in the Northlands. Besides, even if I don't agree to help, do you really think that they'll be able to protect the 7 Northlands, which are already beginning to band together? Rather than running away with their tails between their legs, they'll at least be able to save some face by taking a step back. I'll write a letter to Sloan. Allowing the Casola dukedom to become independent and causing another mega-empire like San Antonio to lose a vassal state was something that the Bardi Empire wanted to see. As for the additional costs, well, the Bardi royalty wouldn't be the one paying. Sacrificing the benefits of some local nobles and weakening them was something that the central royalty wanted to see as well. For us, the most important benefit wasn't the aid we received. Instead, it was the relationship we'd already established with Halent. Perhaps the new Northlands would be able to form a solid alliance with the future Emperor of Bardi. Actually, perhaps it was a coincidence, or perhaps it was fate, but due to a series of coincidences, the meeting between the Northland's most outstanding leader of the Mist Alliance and the future Emperor of Bardi was destined to leave a deep mark in history. Of course, for me, being able to come to an agreement was already a great deal. As for what would happen afterwards, after we agreed on a time to visit the southern sect, I turned around and spoke to Glyna the moment I left. Glyna, remember to be on guard against Bardi and their emperor in the future. That guy's smile gives me goosebumps. It's already quite rare for even 10% of what he says to be true. Also, don't participate in this damned plan. I'll do it by myself, and it'll be easier for me to escape if I fail. It's fine as long as you can obtain the agreement on paper, but don't place too much hope on it. It's hard to say whether or not Halent will be able to obtain the position of Crown Prince. Right after we left, I made no attempt to hide my distrust of the Bardi royalty even before the ink on the agreement was even dry. However, I guessed that Aulus and Halent were probably saying the same thing. Yep, there's no place for personal feelings to exist between countries. You can only talk about benefits when dealing with mega-empires like San Antonio. That sounds so familiar. You said it yourself. I nodded. This was indeed what I was used to saying. But since Glyna noticed this, it meant that she was working hard at her studies, which was already much more reassuring than Renee. It seemed that there were some things that Glyna still hadn't figured out. She hesitated for a moment before asking. Those princes aren't all useless. Isn't the old emperor worried that he'll allow the domain lords to work together with the princes? Won't any of the princes succeed in rebelling? I feel that there's indeed a chance of success. I feel that if such a situation really does occur, the old emperor will happily face his own Armageddon. At any rate, he's raising a venomous scorpion king. If he can raise a venomous scorpion king, he'll probably be delighted that he has a successor. The student will surpass the master. I declined the old emperor's offer to send me off in a carriage. I needed to organize my thoughts while taking a stroll to see the current situation in the capital. We didn't intend to return to the assault airship in the outskirts of the capital. During the negotiations just now, I requested a private residence from the old emperor, intending to use it as a temporary diplomatic mission for the Northlands countries in the Bardi Empire. I also specifically chose a location that wasn't too far from Evelyn's residence. Judging from the strong otherworldly feeling I felt from that underground cave, I felt that the reason why that fierce dragon was staying underground wasn't so simple. If the situation allowed, I wanted to ask more about Evelyn's situation. After all, I felt that the dragon was far more trustworthy than the old and sly emperor, even though it was likely that the two of them were already in cahoots. As I walked on the main road leading to the royal palace, the most obvious change was that the assassins had finally vanished without a trace. On the way, I occasionally saw dragons gliding in the sky, and I was also interrogated by the patrolling guards and knight on the ground. It seemed that the knight who interrogated me had already received an order. They were quite polite and allowed me to pass when they saw that it was me. Silly cat, what do you think? My lord, I feel that there's a tremendous secret behind this. Yep, my lord. There's definitely something fishy about this. At this moment, I was certain that I shouldn't have opened up part of my memories to my magical pet. The silly cat's morals were getting lower and lower. Are you certain? Beifeng is almost here. I feel that the patrolling guards are obviously abnormal. This can only mean that their trap yesterday failed, and they're still making one last attempt. Yep, those old fellows aren't that easy to capture. It's highly likely that they'll fail. This was pretty much what I had expected, but in another aspect, should I say that Harloy's was already undefeatable? My casual threat was actually so effective, scaring Harloy's so much that she became obedient. Even I was quite surprised. You're a veteran undead lord, so why are you so afraid of a young brat? Recently, the Druil Alliance has been gathering evidence of his crimes. Perhaps I should call it the record of beasts hunting or record of his victims. It's been sent to all the Druil, Hunter, and Ranger branches in the various countries. Only now did I learn that while we were patrolling the various countries, Beifeng was also constantly committing crimes across countries and species. Since there were so many victims, the effects were so bad. There were even some Druil victims. Beifeng has now become the public enemy of the entire nature faction. It's said that even the Windchaser group, which specializes in hunting him down, has appeared. Right, do you want to read the record of beasts hunting? Eaglestorm received a copy 2 days ago. It's so thick that it can be used as a brick to hit someone. You'll probably understand if you read it. Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you really think I'd touch something that's destined to blind me? Actually, Beifeng often disappeared and then suddenly appeared. I could guess what he had done, but considering that his personal abilities and loyalty were excellent, and that his actions hadn't broken any laws. Yes, that was the main point. There wasn't a single country that had any laws that prohibited such actions. The law doesn't prohibit such actions, it's not a crime. That was why, from a legal standpoint, Beifeng could only be condemned from the perspective of morality and good morals. However, our law faction followed the rules of the law. The Druil Alliance was a radical terrorist organization to begin with, and it had never been a reasonable organization. Yet, even the normally neutral hunter and ranger organizations had begun to hunt him down. It was likely that Beifeng was in for some serious trouble this time. Considering the fact that this seemed to be getting more and more interesting, I seriously considered how to get out of this situation once the druids surrounded me. The entire nature faction. The last person who was wanted by the entire nature faction was the Pestilence Monarch, who was on the Calamity rankings. I never expected that I would have such a major character under my command. Perhaps Beifeng will one day enter the top 10 Calamity rankings and surpass me. Should I learn from Aulus and be happy that Beifeng surpassed me? How about I just beat him up and then send him out to exchange for bounty money? Beifeng was quite stubborn anyways. At most, I would give him half of the bounty money. Perhaps if he did it a few more times, no one would want to hunt him down anymore. Brother Beifeng. While I was having random thoughts, I suddenly heard Glyna's voice. "PH, I know that you have a good relationship with Beifeng, but don't plead on his behalf. I mean, isn't that Brother Beifeng?" Alright then. Beifeng was wearing a black windbreaker that covered most of his body, and his hood covered his half-dragon face. His black attire made him seem incredibly wretched and suspicious, but that black lizard tail with a pink bow on it exposed his true identity. If this wasn't the Royal Palace district where suspicious people were everywhere, someone would have probably called the police already. Right now, he was surrounded by several Knight Beifeng, and they seemed to be talking about something. Let's just pretend we didn't see anything. If worst comes to worst, we'll use diplomatic channels to get him back tomorrow. But when I got closer, I discovered that it wasn't the night capturing perverts that I had expected. Instead, it's already 500 silver coins. I can't go any lower. Look at the printing, the expressions, the artwork, it's amazing. They're all top quality items. Phut, Brother Beifeng is trying to sell erotica. Do you know what erotica is? There are many erotica books in Sulphur Mountain City. I definitely haven't collected any erotica books about you or Uncle Adam. The two of you aren't compatible at all. This is a completely blind match. Alright then, I've already given up. As expected, there really wasn't a single normal person among my subordinates. That lass collected the erotica books about you and Grimm, you and Shueti. You should do something about it, but right now, even the city lord of Sulphur Mountain City, is looking at it, so it doesn't seem like she can do anything about it. Right, I heard that they've already decided to hold an annual festival where they can sell their erotica books, just like that C87 in your memory. I heard that during last year's C12 festival, Momo's hardcore erotica sold 13,000 copies, breaking a new record. I won't tell you who she used as the model to create the erotica books, since you can probably guess it. Harlois was betraying Gleiner while stabbing me in the heart. I didn't want to guess at all. Actually, when I left Sulphur Mountain City, it was the most peaceful area in the underground. Artists in war-torn areas would easily starve to death. Coupled with the many years of influence from transmigrators, Sulphur Mountain City's culture and art industry was already extremely developed, but it seemed to be overdeveloped. Those bastards, now that I thought about it, I really couldn't do anything about it. Right now, the city lord of Sulphur Mountain City was Anne, and the Church of Law was in charge of religious affairs. Without any official position, it would be impossible for them to issue documents like 330 suggestions on how to regulate the construction of Sulphur Mountain City's spiritual plane. I can't do anything about Sulphur Mountain City, but I can do something about this bastard in front of me. When I aggressively walked over and saw me, Beifeng suddenly trembled. He picked up his book and was about to run, but the customer pulled on it, causing the book to fall on the ground, scattering all sorts of colorful pages. With just one glance, I knew why he wanted to run, so I silently unsheathed my sword. TSK, 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 Princess Peach's personal art collection, personally drawn by Momo, a super limited edition gold edition. She's really well drawn, and even I'm a little tempted. The content at the end is really strange. Isn't this the illustration of the victims in Beifeng's crime record? Beifeng, do you even need to preach when you're scamming money? Halfway through reading, you suddenly changed into such a thing. Even if you don't become a eunuch, you'll at least become a pervert. Isn't this 10 times worse than poisoning? Right now, Beifeng Heralt had no way of responding to Harloi's schadenfreude. Right now, he needed to do his best to think of a way to survive a certain berserk sword saint whose veins were popping out. Boss, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to increase my sales so that the world can understand my personal hobbies. I've tried so many cover girls, but you're still the best. You still dare to run. Take my evil vanquishing / Chapter 391. It had already been 3 days since the negotiation with a certain emperor ended. After the minor storm, the city seemed to have returned to normal. However, in my opinion, this was only the calm before the storm. Mills Milan, the most devout prince of the Bardi royal family. He was diligent all his life and shed blood for his country. Emperor Aulus XIII highly regarded him. But today, he was assassinated by a despicable assassin. Those hypocritical villains even disguised themselves as allies of the mage country in an attempt to incite discord between the two countries. But under the wise eyes of Emperor Aulus, how could such a clumsy trick possibly be effective? There can only be one truth. The assassin is the Holy Church. Although it sounded ridiculous, this was indeed the truth that everyone wanted to see. Mill's assassination had already been determined. He had been killed by an assassin sent by the Holy Church. As for the so-called Dark Elf assassin, that was only a convenient way to frame Bardi's closest ally, the Mage Country. When the citizens saw the announcements outside the city walls the next morning, their expressions were enough to hide what it meant by "the world is changing so quickly that I don't know anything." Of course, Rumors were already flying everywhere. However, rumors were sometimes very useful, such as when a country was in chaos. But sometimes, they would only become interesting stories that even the tabloids didn't dare to publish, such as this incident. The next day, Mill's funeral was held. It seemed that the Bardi royal guards wanted to hurry up and put a final conclusion on this incident. But from a certain standpoint, holding a grand funeral for Mills in the name of Bardi was actually giving Mills a lot of face. The next day, when Bardi's royal guards went to clean up Mill's residence, they unexpectedly discovered evidence that the undead had colluded with the undead. They then investigated the information they obtained from Mills and raided the residences of 2 other princes. The reason? It was actually quite simple. What the princes wanted the most right now was someone who was capable of fighting. Naturally, the undead were quite capable of fighting. Plus, with their previous friendship, the princes easily hooked up with the undead. Apart from providing cover for the undead, the princes would also provide food for the bloodthirsty undead. Judging from the dozen or so outsiders that Mills had plundered from his basement and the punishment room, it was no mistake that Yorn had directly judged Mills as a sinner of the most heinous crimes. Judging from the testimony of the rescued man, he had been corrupted for a long time. He, who worshipped the evil god of misery in private, made rapid progress and also used a large number of offerings with his own hands. He was once a true soldier. He once fought for his comrades for 2 days and 2 nights in a desperate situation. He once swore in front of me that he would change the Bardi military's corrupt and inefficient aristocratic system. Now, I've harmed him. After listening to the eunuch's report, the old emperor sat in the garden in a daze for the whole morning. In the end, he could only squeeze out these words. Perhaps, as a hero who returned from a hellish battlefield, his firm will was able to withstand the most desperate situation, but after 10 years of wealth and power, he had unknowingly become the man he once hated the most. Let's have a grand burial. Perhaps this was the last bit of sympathy the old emperor had for the successor candidate whom he once had high hopes for. The next day's funeral was for the 3 princes. Of course, to the public, the Holy Church's assassins were trying to kill the heroic princes in an attempt to create conflict between the 2 countries, perhaps even inciting a war. And so, the Holy Church was implicated again. Why did I say again? Actually, it wasn't wrong for the Holy Church to be implicated. Humans were creatures that were naturally inclined towards the light. The God of light, the God of holy light, and so on would naturally benefit from his teachings. Ignoring whether or not this inclination came from the sun itself, when a holy church that represented light and justice ruled over more than half of humanity's spiritual and religious beliefs, from a certain standpoint, the Holy Church had absolute control. Why was that? Because as long as the Holy Church gave a certain opinion or action that was correct, it would be meaningless for others to oppose it. And actually, considering how difficult it would be for the Holy Church to reach a consensus, it would be enough if the Holy Church could reach 1/3 of its beliefs. And it just so happened that in the world of Aishi, the number of holy light believers in the human world was more than 1/3. Absolute power meant absolute corruption. But what did absolute divine authority mean? You immaculately dressed holy light bishops claim that everything you do is authorized by the God of holy light. In that case, if the God of holy light guarantees your rationality and morality, then who will guarantee the God of holy light's rationality and justice? At the very least, from what I've seen, people with benevolent expressions are beastly, and people who are thieving like chickens and stealing like dogs are using the name of God. According to your logic, since you hypocrites haven't received divine punishment yet, could it be that your true God has already lost his rationality? Is God dead? Or has God gone mad as well? A certain insane blasphemer whose name had been erased unknowingly spread his words throughout the entire world. It was rumored that this insane blasphemer who was laughing maniacally on a stake was once a devout cardinal. His crime was to personally kill several colleagues of his who played with boys. One of them was even his teacher. However, I feel that his greatest crime was telling the truth that God had gone mad. Perhaps it was instinctive for humans to worship the light, but it was also instinctive for humans to break free from shackles and restraints. Not to mention the natural conflict between royalty and divine authority. Most importantly, the Holy Church, which had absolute divine authority, was constantly rotting, and reforming. Naturally, there would be no end to those who resisted. Ordinary plants would be unable to survive in deserts without water or soil. Seeds of discord would often grow on cliffs filled with cracks. Pure holy light doesn't require belief in a false god. The Holy Church only believed in a false god who borrowed the name of holy light. Prince Mills, Prince Thomas, and Prince Catalan were all holy disciples who believed in pure holy light. Their deaths were the result of an evil god's fear of true belief. Archbishop Amoy of the Southern sect angrily berated the Holy Church's hypocrisy and shamelessness in front of all the nobles and merchants of Bardi while displaying his own holy light. Only the light is eternal. In the name of the first Pope of the Holy Church, I declare these 3 princes to be martyred holy disciples. We shall fight for revenge, for justice, and for pure holy light. A coincidence created history. Since there was an opportunity in front of them, the Church of Pure Holy Light stepped onto the stage of history. Archbishop Amoy also became Pope Amoy I, and the 3 wicked villains also became holy apostles. In the background was the tearful old Emperor Halent, who had just lost his beloved son. Archduke Halent took the lead in making an ancient vow, using a small knife to cut a scar on his face, vowing revenge, and then angrily roaring in response to the people's cries. We've lived here for generations, but those hypocritical villains actually judged us as heretics, invaded our land, and killed our citizens. Fine then, since they want war, we'll give them war. Victory to Bardi. By the time Halent's speech came to an end, the funeral turned into a pledging ceremony. Now that everyone was shouting victory to Bardi together, war was no longer a symbol. In the crowd, I covered my mouth with my cape to prevent myself from laughing out loud. I lowered my head and smiled as I explained to Gleiner next to me. The righteous Halent. The sincere Aulus. The pure and holy Mills. At this moment, the relationship between holy and evil was so ambiguous. This was the royal family, famous for being snakes and scorpions. Perhaps this is why I always feel that human nature is so difficult to understand, and why humans are so interesting. Chapter 392. From a certain standpoint, the recent series of events had greatly helped Aulus. It wasn't that he was helping Aulus declare war against the Holy Church, as this had already been planned from the very start. The true result of this series of events was that Aulus had made up his mind and chosen Halent as his successor. Since the successor to the throne had already been decided, the other candidates were naturally unnecessary. And so, after a grand ceremony, all the princes declared, "We've been deeply influenced by Brother Mill's example. We're all willing to follow in Brother Mill's footsteps and go to the most dangerous places, to the lowest levels, to the front lines of the battlefield. We'll fight for our country and our family as ordinary soldiers, and we'll take revenge for our country and our family." Therefore, the princes volunteered to be the bottom-level commanders. They were either sent to the meat grinder in the front line of Nightrain City or to the Crusade army in the east that was about to set off, becoming glorious cannon fodder in the front line. Aulus didn't take things too far. He didn't announce Halent's true identity to the public yet, nor did he explicitly state that Bardi's emperor had to have outstanding military talent, military achievements. In fact, Aulus even told every prince to bring along their strongest subordinates, no more than 10. If their subordinates were strong enough and they were able to achieve enough military achievements, it was possible that the position of crown prince could be replaced. Of course, considering that Halent was the city lord of Nightrain City and had a squadron of Dragon Knight troops under his command, it would be incredibly difficult for the other princes to make a comeback. Basically, this was only a theoretical possibility. Serves them right. What were they doing earlier? If they had focused their attention on killing off other competitors, they wouldn't have fallen to such a state. Since some people were angry about this type of mainstream opinion became more and more common under the influence of others. Not everyone focused their attention on the throne. There were princes who had already achieved a certain level of success in certain areas. For example, the 39th prince, Prince Ainty, was quite accomplished in the field of art. He had even helped many impoverished artists, and he was also quite a famous connoisseur of art. At this time, Aulus immediately gave him the position of vice-chairman of the Bardi Artists Association. Aulus's meaning was quite obvious. This prince could forget about his dream of becoming emperor, But being a romantic prince was no problem. From a certain standpoint, people like Aent were the smart ones. But with the throne in front of them, even the smartest young man would selectively choose to be stupid. There were very few people who would give up fighting for the throne after becoming a prince and focus on something else. And when the outcome of the battle was revealed in advance, and they were faced with the misfortune of being forced to become cannon fodder, it wasn't that none of the princes had other thoughts. There were quite a few princes who were colluding with other factions and local domain lords. There were also quite a few princes who urgently mobilized their troops. Not only that, apart from the reorganized Royal Knight squadrons, there were also several adult dragons escorting the princes. Most of the princes didn't need to think too much about this. If there's a majority, there's a minority. Did a prince make a move? That's right, of course there were fanatics who viewed the throne as their only goal in life. The end result was that assassins from the Holy Church appeared a few more times. Next month, it was likely that they would have to find time to organize another mass funeral. When internal conflicts reached a certain degree of intensity, it would become a common tactic of certain countries to focus their citizens' attention on the battlefield. Night Rain City was about to receive the strongest reinforcements in its history. 1/4 of the Bardi domain lords had sent out their personal armies, and several dozen princes had brought their personal retainers to lead the front lines. The newly born southern sect would replace the Holy Church in fighting against the undead. This was a chance for them to prove themselves to the world. Meanwhile, Halent himself was leading his personal retainers and an army of nearly 200,000 soldiers to fight against the invading Holy War army. Did this seem inconceivable? Halent was clearly the city lord of Night Rain City, and the defending troops there were all his personal retainers and himself. Yet, he had actually sent them to fight on another battlefront. Wasn't this a typical example of giving random orders? It seemed inexplicable, but it was actually completely worthless. It was just a consideration outside of the battlefield. Right now, Halent was no longer a general who led the charge. Instead, he was a king who stabilized the country. Unlike small border countries that only had princes as generals, major countries valued stability and authority. So-called face was also a tangible benefit. As the crown prince and the next emperor, Halent couldn't afford to lose. Aulus couldn't allow Halent to lose either. Otherwise, the royal family's authority would decrease, which would cause a chain reaction that even major countries wouldn't be able to endure. This was especially so now that the domain lords were getting restless. If the royal family lost, ambitious individuals would start taking action as well. That was why the major countries wouldn't personally lead an army unless it was absolutely necessary. After all, while having the emperor personally lead an army to boost morale, they also had to consider the chain reaction that would occur if the emperor was defeated or even captured. That's right, they would lose. Even though the southern battlefront had far more undead troops than the eastern battlefront, considering the possibility of an undead emperor interfering, and the fact that the undead emperors had already entered a new phase of the Holy War, no matter how strong the southern battlefront was, nobody was certain how the southern battlefront would turn out. In the east, even though the Holy Church's famous generals were stationed there, the Holy Church's expeditionary army had become extremely frightened after being baptized by the dragons. Not only that, the Holy Church had cut off all of their spies and reinforcements, not to mention that the Holy Church had sent their elite squadrons and ace troops. If they still couldn't win, there was no point in keeping the Holy Church's crown prince alive. To be honest, when I heard that Halent's army even had 2 dragons elders and several immemorial dragons, I knew that it would be impossible for Halent to lose even if he wanted to. Not only Aulus, even the dragons won't allow Halent to lose. And after taking care of the eastern battlefront's remnants, Halent could still go to the southern battlefront to fight for more achievements. And if he lost the southern battlefront, he would be able to save his country at a critical moment and reverse the situation. Don't worry about not being strong enough, Aulus will mobilize all of his country. Once the Holy Church completely enters a state of war, the foundational strength of a mega empire will truly be terrifying. What if the southern battlefront directly wins? Wouldn't Halent be inferior to them? That's even better. Halent is the city lord of Night Rain City, and his subordinates will be the cornerstone of victory. His defenses against the undead will be the theoretical basis for defeating the undead. Halent will still be the greatest contributor. How deceitful. Doesn't that mean that no matter if he wins or loses, he'll benefit the most? What's so special about a guaranteed profit? Indeed deceitful, but this is politics. His ascension to the throne will be the most beneficial for Bardi. This was another benefit of choosing Halent as the next Bardi emperor. The dragons had already used their actions to express the greatest amount of goodwill towards Aulus and Bardi. Perhaps just based on his relationship with the dragons, Halent would always be one of the top candidates for the throne. Now that this candidate's name was finally confirmed, the next Bardi emperor would become the bridge between the two species. When considering the grim reality of the Holy War, it was only natural for the Bardi Empire and Dragon World's dragons to band together. The relationship between the Bardi Empire and the Dragon World's dragons would definitely become closer and closer. Aulus is indeed a sly old fox. He sees far into the future. It probably has something to do with those prophecies you left behind back then. If you didn't make it sound so serious, why would he be preparing for the worst-case scenario from the very start? I don't remember what I said back then, either. But I'm guessing that I definitely made it sound the most serious. All prophets are like that. Only by making the future sound like Armageddon will others help you save your life. And based on my personal habits, I was most likely telling the truth back then. The seeds that I casually planted back then had now grown into towering trees. At the very least, from the current situation, Bardi had already escaped from the worst-case scenario in the game's history. And as long as Bardi didn't collapse, the Mage Country and the other neighboring countries wouldn't be too isolated in the upcoming calamity. Everything seemed to still be there. Plus, the southern sect had been discovered, and the Holy Church would definitely suffer a calamity on the eastern battlefront. If there was anything that could make me happier than good news, it would probably be bad news about my enemy. I had been in a good mood recently. You don't intend on interfering? Why would I interfere when I have nothing better to do? Since I'm feeling this way, I need to think more about my own future. Besides, that sly old fox doesn't want me to participate. The southern sect. I only had a short conversation with that Amoya I, and that old fox personally came to disturb me. Didn't you see how that sly old fox almost wrote "Be careful of Roland" on his face? He even purposely asked me to play chess, chat, and drink tea with him. His chess skills are terrible, and he wouldn't let me leave even after I lost several dozen games. He wasted half a night. Although the Church of Pure Holy Light was established in Bardi and had a close relationship with the royalty, when considering Roland's relationship with this church, as well as the immeasurable nature of religious believers, to be more direct, fanatics were willing to do anything for the sake of their faith. If Roland really did say that the Holy Light calls for the Northlands to be the Holy Land, that sly old fox wouldn't even be able to cry. Indeed, his worries weren't unnecessary. You're not angry at being wrongly accused. Your temper is getting better and better. No, he didn't wrongly accuse me. In fact, that sly old fox even saw the agreement I prepared. You really did try to poach him. Can you at least have some shame? Shame? What's that? Is it edible? Why can't we poach him? After all, our relationship with the Holy Church is terrible enough. The God of Holy Light is allied with the Law God, and the God of Holy Light himself has a rather ambiguous attitude towards the Holy Church. We can totally accept the Church of Pure Holy Light. Holy Knight and Holy Light priests are the most popular job classes in battle. Our warriors also need the support of the Holy Light. But Aulus is still the better one. At the very least, you failed. Who said that? I succeeded. So what if Aulus was right in front of me? You can't possibly stop two Holy Light job classes from exchanging their understanding of the Holy Light, can you? Even if that lousy chess player wants to play chess with me, I'll defeat Amoya I in a debate about the Holy Church's teachings and also checkmate that sly old fox. Amazing, right? I became even happier as I talked about how the sly old fox did his best to maintain a smile even though he was obviously furious. You're amazing, especially when it comes to being shameless. Is the Southern sect really intending to leave Bardi and give up on such a good base? Of course that's impossible. Amoya and his bishops aren't idiots, either, since they were able to reach this point. However, they'll soon establish branch churches in the Mist Alliance countries to spread the teachings of pure holy light. Amoya has also agreed to have his number one disciple go to Donglan to become a regional bishop. He'll also have more than 2,000 core members. The Mist Alliance will no longer lack holy light job classes in the future. For the Southern sect, this is also an opportunity to establish a backup plan and expand their influence. This is obviously a win-win situation. We don't even have to worry about them not doing their best. Aulus won't be able to stop them even if he wants to. Aren't you afraid of causing a religious conflict in the Northlands? There's already the Church of Law there, along with the undead. I'm not afraid. I've been going there quite often recently in order to confirm the Southern sect's teachings and then decide my attitude towards them. As expected of the Holy Bible that I personally wrote. Although there were some changes as I passed down the Holy Bible, it's still quite mild. Don't judge people based on their race or birth. Hope that the holy light will shine like the sun, warm and not burn any existence. Holy light will only punish evil brought about by evil deeds. Perhaps this is the true nature of holy light. It's the true nature of holy light that you understand. Still, it's indeed a wonderful thing to have a holy knight who isn't hostile towards the undead. You didn't go there just to confirm their teachings, did you? At the very least, judging from how you won against Amoya in a debate, are you trying to change their teachings? The silly cat rolled her eyes. Even though it was clearly a question, she used an affirmative sentence, as if she had already seen through everything. Heh, there's still a chance for me to change my teachings now. Once they really spread, it'll be impossible to change them anymore. I'm the original author of the Holy Light Church, and Amoya, the doujinshi author, is seriously asking me how to set up the Holy Light Church. I intend to teach them all about my understanding of holy light so that they can change their teachings within acceptable limits. This is going to be quite a troublesome matter. Amoya's about to head out with the army, so I need to hurry up. After the old fox leaves the church, I'm going to have a chat with him. It's fine as long as everything goes smoothly. But for things to go so smoothly, it feels a little strange. Is something wrong with the way things are going? You don't say. I also feel like something's wrong recently. How could my luck ever be so good? It's so smooth recently that I'm even a little afraid. I'm thinking that if there really is a problem, it's most likely that Halent lost by a large margin. Why are you covering my mouth? Shut up, you damned jinx. Haven't you caused enough trouble yet? Chapter 393. In a small and private courtyard, a man's battle against a woman was nearing its end. The woman was already moaning weakly on the ground. Have you had enough? You've been doing this for an entire night. Even I can't take it anymore. You go take your medicine when you're tired, but I don't even have a moment to rest. I've never seen someone as shameless as you. Her petite body was only covered by a silk scarf, but it was now completely soaked. Her childlike face was flushed red from overexertion. Perhaps I should be proud that I was able to make the famous snake archduchess reveal such a helpless expression. The human body was filled with countless secrets. High-level undead were able to mimic normal human physiological reactions not just for pleasure. It would seem that the snake archduchess had already recovered many of her sensory organs and bodily fluids in order to develop her body's potential. Hehe, since you can't take it anymore, just lie down and enjoy it. Yep, if you can't take it anymore, just spread your legs and lie down. Damn it, who threw a brick at me? I laughed in delight as I listened to the snake archduchess' exhausted moans. However, someone suddenly turned around and threw a brick at me. Stop talking nonsense. There's an underage here. Is there any meaning in purposefully making it sound so ambiguous? What bodily fluids? Why don't you just call it sweat? I glanced around and saw that Glyna, Timlad, and the other underage undead were all looking at me with great interest. Damn it, what were those high-powered binoculars and memory crystals for? Were they intending to make copies and sell them for money? If they sold well, remember to split the profits with me. She was so amused that I couldn't help but follow her. Alexandra, get up. It's time for the 121st round of training. Let's continue. This time, We need to last for at least 30 seconds. Yep, this was only pure martial arts training. I didn't have the habit of torturing prisoners. As for all the other useless things, I naturally didn't have any when I was being stared at by a group of people. Cough, I just wanted an eye-pleasing maid that was suitable for maids. As a man, was there anything wrong with that? Getting back on topic, there wasn't anything particularly disharmonious happening in my private courtyard. I really wanted to put on an interrogation play or something, but right after I excitedly created one of the 10 great tortures of the Manchurian Qing dynasty using ice, the Snake Archduchess unhesitatingly confessed everything. How could you surrender so easily? Where's your honor and loyalty? You've tempered your body hundreds and thousands of times. Where is your unyielding heart as a warrior monk? How could he do it just like that? Wouldn't I have no sense of accomplishment then? Honor. There was no honor for the dead. Loyalty. The king I served is dead. All right, she surrendered so confidently. What she said made too much sense. I was suddenly rendered speechless. Actually, using the senators under my command as an example, I didn't expect too much from the undead lord's loyalty and honor. They had already died once, so they didn't care too much about anything other than their stubbornness. Yep, to be more direct, they were a bunch of bastards with no morals and no faith. And in the undead plains, when undead lords fought against each other, the winner would obtain everything. The strong preyed on the weak, and submitting to the strong was already engraved in the undead plains bloodlines. Surrendering wasn't something the undead lords needed to think too much about, especially when the undead lords were fighting against another undead emperor. I've already done my best. This counts as me repaying Lord Asso for cancelling our soul contract before his death. Of course, I didn't dare to believe such information that came too easily. Undead also had their own ways of communicating with each other. While it was true that I could obtain information by extracting the undead lord's soul, it would be far too wasteful. Using a soul contract to establish a subservient relationship was the most common and effective method. A soul contract was a contract where the master would die with the servant. Any undead lord with even the slightest bit of backbone would never sign such a contract unless it was absolutely necessary. And Asso indeed obtained the loyalty of these proud undead lords. At the very least, no matter how much I threatened him, he wouldn't be willing to sign a soul contract. Taking a step back, it took me quite a bit of brainstorming just to get a myth-ranked undead to sign a slave contract with a mandatory order. At the very least, the 10 great tortures I showed her had basically no effect at all. In the end, I took out my ice flames and threatened her to become an eternal ice sculpture, so she obediently agreed. But even though she surrendered and easily sold out all of her teammates, we still didn't gain anything from this. The Snake Archduchess herself had only been in the mortal plane for less than a year. She was an elite undead lord who belonged to Asso. She was a lone undead lord. To put it nicely, she had a high status and authority, but to put it bluntly, she was like a lone commander who had suddenly been transferred to an unfamiliar department. She definitely wouldn't be able to communicate with Asso in the mortal plane anymore after she was captured. Most of Asso's core subordinates had been dug out, and Alexandra didn't know much to begin with. Now, the only useful information she had on the undead emperors and undead lords was probably the Snake Archduchess's personality and abilities. None of them would be useful in the short term. I don't keep useless people here. If it's food expenses, pay with your body. Why are you all looking at me like that? Did I say something wrong? She's such a rare opponent. She'll be perfect for training in martial arts. Come, let's spar. It seemed that there had been a problem recently. My words always seemed to go off in strange directions. But for me, the Snake Archduchess' greatest value right now was to train in martial arts. If it wasn't for this armor, I would have already died several hundred times over. I like to summarize things after a battle because any problems revealed in a real battle would always be incredibly fatal. For example, it would be quite easy to solve a problem after a save and load. Of course, if you didn't make it through, it would be even more effective to summarize your experience after reviving. Normally, a bad ending would give you a lot of experience in the game, and you would even be able to inherit your equipment and experience. Unfortunately, there weren't many opportunities like this in the real world, and time wouldn't allow me to reincarnate endlessly. Otherwise, I would sooner or later become a perfect model. It seemed that the topic was getting more and more off topic. Getting back to the main topic, before this battle, I had never expected that I would ever be suppressed so badly by a melee combatant. My every move was easily predicted, and my last move was instantly countered. I was completely unable to defend against my opponent's attacks. If it wasn't for the fact that my armor had astonishing defense, I would have long since lost. If this was a simple duel of martial arts, I would have lost countless times already. Although warrior monks were indeed known as the most talented melee combatant job class, it was far too ridiculous for me to be countered so badly. Since I couldn't understand why, I decided to ask my opponent. Of course, she refused at the very beginning. She probably felt that. I just surrendered, so I couldn't immediately do whatever you said. Wouldn't that be the same as making herself look bad? And so, I showed her how I modified Harloys and told her that slimes were no longer able to satisfy me, and that she could choose to be a snail or an earthworm. And so, she obediently agreed. Your swordsmanship. Not bad at all. I'm not trying to be sarcastic here. You probably learned your basics from the ancient court faction. Every single one of your sword attacks is excellent. Plus, you have excellent combat instincts and talent. It wouldn't be wrong to say that you're a swordsmanship genius that only appears once every century. Yep, you're quite excellent among humans. Alright then, her last few words negated everything. Yes, you were quite excellent, but only among humans. She was a swordsmanship genius that only appears once every century, but sorry, that was still only within the human category. I didn't get angry out of embarrassment. I simply listened in silence, because this was reality. Since the Snake Archduchess was capable of beating me to the point where I didn't know which way was north, I just listened to what she had to say. Besides, based on my experience, it was always best to listen to the experts when it came to swordsmanship. Experts' harsh words were usually good advice. Yes, you're quite excellent among humans. But you should be able to tell from your fight against me that your swordsmanship is still focused on the situation where your opponent is human. At most, you'll be 3 to 4 meters tall. Your swordsmanship lacks imagination and flexibility, so I can easily predict your next attack. In fact, I can tell just by looking at your eyes and muscle movements that you'll be able to predict your next attack. This was indeed a problem, but how was I supposed to solve it? It wasn't like I could remove all the bones in my body, nor could I change the direction of my joints. Even if I had imagination, I wouldn't be able to use it. Don't look at me with such a doubtful expression. My words are based on facts. Have you ever seen an opponent who suddenly breaks apart and throws their limbs at you like bombs? Have you ever seen an opponent whose entire body is covered in grease and whose fist gets stuck to it? Have you ever seen an opponent whose entire body is indestructible and whose only weakness is the soles of their feet? Do you know why I chose this body type to be so nimble? Back in the day, before I formed my own combat style, not only did I experience countless battlefields, I even challenged thousands of monasteries and fought against thousands of legend-ranked warrior monks. The Snake Archduchess paused for a moment as she suddenly revealed an expression of lingering fear, as if she recalled some painful memory. Actually, I'm not that special. Don't think that my melee combat techniques are already at the peak. In fact, I've lost several dozen times in thousands of fights, and I only managed to escape by sheer luck. One of them even managed to break all of my joints with a single punch. If it wasn't for the fact that I was already a blood tribe member at the time, perhaps the best outcome would have been to become a cripple for the rest of my life. As expected, the older the warrior monks, the more powerful they became. The only way to deal with them was to never let them get close to you. Fortunately, it seemed that the warrior monks hadn't lived for very long. I suddenly thought of Amdaroken, whose form as a warrior monk seemed to be an imitation of an opponent that he was unable to defeat. And in the undead plane, battles between the undead are never-ending in order to advance in power level and survive. In the past, at least 3 of my opponents at the same power level were able to easily defeat me, and 2 of the undead emperors were far superior to me in terms of martial arts. Most of them were purely humanoid, but their combat techniques had already reached a level that I was unable to reach. There were even more who could defeat me with their natural talents. I had originally been quite proud of my own sword techniques. After all, being able to become a sword saint without much effort was proof of my talent. But now, it seemed that I was still at the level of a human. If this had been 300 years ago, I would have been proud of myself and could have dominated the world, but, considering my future opponents, this is no good at all. My future opponents would only become stronger and stronger. I might even encounter monsters that were thousands or even tens of thousands of years old. No matter how powerful my magic sword was, it would be meaningless if I couldn't hit my opponent. In that case, as an important foundational part of my combat strength system, improving my sword techniques was absolutely necessary. Can't you see it in real combat at your current level? The accumulation of combat experience will eventually bring about changes. Your foundation is quite solid, but it's obvious that you lack actual combat experience. Right, there are also all sorts of ancient sword techniques. They've long since achieved effects that magic can't even achieve with pure sword techniques. I recalled the ancient and immemorial sword techniques that my system and justice points could exchange for. Then, I looked at my nearly empty justice points. I recalled that the silly cat and my system had been helping me spend money recently, causing my justice points to dwindle. I originally had enough justice points to buy half a book, but now I only had enough to buy a single page. I almost started crying. I wonder if Bayana will sell a single page to me. Cough, cough, that's too embarrassing. I'll stop thinking about it for now. Since I can't talk about ancient sword techniques for now, I should first use real combat to train myself. Isn't this a rare target right in front of me? Alright then, it was no longer possible for me to become cannon fodder on the battlefield. Mortal battles in the mortal plane were also unable to give me the experience I needed. It was rare for me to meet an opponent like Alexandra, so I limited her physical strength to the gold rank and forbade her from using any killing moves. Then, I reduced her speed and overall difficulty so that I could continue training. Even so, I was still beaten up quite badly at first. But later, I discovered that the dream log was able to recover my stamina and injuries just like on the battlefield. It was the Snake Archduchess's so-called medicine. And so, after more than 100 battles, the situation changed. Fine then, it didn't change at all. How could it be so easy to improve? Although I was still the one getting beaten up, at least I was able to last slightly longer. Unfortunately, the Snake Archduchess was currently lying on the ground, pretending to be dead and refusing to get up no matter what. Alright, I'll let you go today. It'd be such a waste if you die in one go. Don't even think about running away. Countless eyes are watching you. How about I turn you into a mouse? You'll be a perfect match for Harlois. Let me give you a warning. If you intend to turn her into a mouse, you'd better tell Beifeng. He recently brought back a nest of whitehair stinger rats. Alright, I will. Who's Beifeng? The ignorant undead lord even asked out of curiosity. Glyna had an evil smile on her face as she directly gave her a book. The Snake Archduchess then flipped through a few pages and immediately stood up. Lord Roland, I've suddenly realized something. Let's continue training. While I sighed at how a certain undead lord was trembling slightly, I couldn't help but come up with an idea. How about I turn any captives that refuse to surrender into animals and feed them to Beifeng in the future? That's so inhumane. That's so cruel and inhumane. Lord Roland, please reconsider. Just doing such an evil deed will cause you to be treated as an evil villain. Boss, I object. I, Beifeng, am not a casual person. Yep, you're not a human at all. Chapter 394. The advantage of choosing a secluded manor with its own entrance and courtyard was that I could build it as I pleased without the neighbors complaining that I was disturbing them in the middle of the night. Cough, I meant that I could slightly strengthen my military facilities and training without being noticed. According to my agreement with Aulus, in order to participate in the upcoming events, I indeed needed to reorganize my subordinate strength. Being a peerless general sounded great, but it was actually just another way of saying that I was a commander without an army. In consideration of future high-intensity battles, coupled with the increasingly troublesome current situation, it was indeed time to reorganize the Mist Flag's combat strength. Yep, The mist flag was the mist from Roland Mist. It wasn't the Donglan royal family that Renee was in. It was my, Roland's, personal force, or perhaps my family. If we put all our allied forces together, their combat strength would be quite impressive. However, many of them belonged to certain countries or alliances, but not many of them could be completely under my name. My 7 deadly sins, lust was still sleeping, pride was disobedient, and sloth wasn't even born yet, my red hunting hounds, many of whom were working in Donglan, while most of them were still messing around in the underground, and then there were my retainers, such as my personal advisor Timlad, Olivia, and her group of engineers and alchemists, the merchant guild that Eliza had left behind as a gift, the great Druil Eaglestorm, and the dark elves Diana, Yoren, Momo, and Victoria, who were no longer restricted by their duties. Yep, and wait. Why do I have to wait when it's my turn? A certain Draken complained. Isn't it because you're becoming more and more associated with the word harmony? Sooner or later, you'll be able to summon the holy light of harmony just by using your name. With my status as the god of law's divine envoy and my past relationships, I could indeed command Shueti, Lilith, and the other law job classes. However, strictly speaking, they weren't under my control. They were loyal to the Church of Law, and as law enforcers and judges, they should indeed remain neutral. With my identity as the last descendant of the Mist, I can indeed command Donglan's Aurora Knight and Sluware's Royal Knight. But strictly speaking, before these warriors, there are still the 2 empresses, Renee and Glyna. It isn't suitable for me to command them frequently and directly. Actually, every time before I made a move, I would have Renee and Glyna personally lead the team. This was not only a way for the young kings to gain experience, but also a way to show respect to the royal authority. Of course, as the Mist Alliance was established, as a core member of the Mist Alliance, I would have more and more hidden subordinates under my command. However, it was possible that my direct combat strength would decrease as well. Normally, I didn't have many subordinates under my command. If I wanted to start a war or deal with a war, I could only rely on my personal charisma. This wasn't my personal situation, but rather a common problem in this generation. Even if I didn't want to admit it, the basic foundation of humanity in the world of Aishi was still nobles and knights. The harsh environment caused the weak humans to learn to band together for warmth. Nobles ruled over their citizens, and they also had the responsibility of protecting their citizens. Meanwhile, countless domain lords pledged their loyalty to the royal authority, and together, they formed a kingdom or empire. Of course, there were also countries with a parliamentary system and a republic system. However, these countries were either small in size, such as a single city and a single country, or they had special situations, such as a unified theocracy or a mixture of different ethnic groups. However, the dominant system was always the feudal system of feudal lords, who were considered reactionaries in the olden days. I didn't try to start a bourgeois or proletarian revolution like how transmigrators often appeared in novels. That was because such a social system and concept suited the current reality of society. Forcing an advanced system that didn't fit the current reality would only cause the wheels of history to roll past me. The weak would serve the strong, and the strong would protect the weak. When harsh living conditions required such a direct rule of survival, the nobles who possessed power would naturally always exist. Those who weren't originally nobles would also become nobles or feudal lords after obtaining power. And in the current feudal era, even the king of a country would only be the largest domain lord in that country. His power came more from his authority. In reality, the only direct subordinates he had were his family's territory and the knight who was loyal to that family. Yep, the royal knight. In most situations, a royal knight was a personal knight who was loyal to the royal family. However, since the royal family was the ruler of the country, there was no difference between being loyal to the royal family and being loyal to the royal family. Alright, now that I've said so much, I can see that the countries in this world were completely different from the modern countries on Earth. From a certain point of view, the countries in Aisha's world were made up of countless families. The knight's loyalty was usually to that family, not to the so-called country. In fact, it could even be said that there wasn't a pure concept of a country. And the composition of this family wasn't purely based on bloodline. It was also possible to have a common ideal or a common goal. In order to resist the tyranny and genocide of the Lav Empire, countless races and people hid and moved to the Shimmering Mountains. When they really drove out the Lav Empire, a family with the emblem of White Eagle became the master of that mountain range. And the descendants of those survivors became a new race, the Tanyang people, and they were the descendants of Eagle. Completely different from this was the Farron family. They were a group of scholars who specialized in the study of ancient arcana and astronomy. They conducted research under the guidance of a peerless genius named Farron. After a long period of time, they intermarried with each other, becoming a legendary family with generations of astrological archmages. A country was a combination of families. A local knight would be loyal to the local domain lord, the local domain lord would be loyal to the royal family, and all idle knight would be loyal to the royal family. The destruction of a country would usually be the destruction of the royal family of that country. That was why the destruction of a country's royal family was sometimes even more dangerous than an invasion by foreign enemies. That's why I can say that as long as I'm alive, the Mist Kingdom isn't destroyed. And the loyal royal knight and warriors of the Mist Kingdom are currently following me as undead. In that case, in the eyes of the public, does that mean that our Northland's Mist family isn't destroyed as well? This, I really don't know. Why don't we ask Cavendish about it? From a certain standpoint, there really was no precedent for what happened between the two of us. Indeed, there was no precedent for someone dying and then coming back to life and going to hell. However, René's Donglan royal family, the Mist family, and Sluware's royal family, could only be viewed as a branch of the original Northland's Mist family. This was something that their founder had admitted when he raised his flag. If I directly admitted that René and Glyna were members of the Northland's Mist family, it was likely that the two of them would have to be placed under me. Not only would I, as the original owner of this land, have a difficult time interacting with the two princesses in the future, it might even cause a war between my descendants over the legitimacy of the Northland's Mist family. This was something that I obviously didn't want to see. And no matter what happened in the past, now that I was walking the world as Roland Mist, it was only natural that the Northland's Mist family still existed. At the very least, it could be seen as the Northland's Mist family's revival. Bustian and the others had already privately complained to me several times. They hoped that I would be able to raise the Mist family's flag again. Even if the country was destroyed, the family would still exist. They hoped that I would be able to raise the Mist family's flag and revive the Northland's Mist family. On a different level, this was indeed a necessity after the Mist Alliance was established. I anticipated that the Mist Alliance would be a parliamentary alliance of countries. However, only the royalty of each country would be able to become a member of the Mist Alliance. Since I was participating in the Mist Alliance under my personal name, it was obviously inappropriate for me to do so. Alright then, to be honest, what I found the most intolerable was that I never expected that these old skeletons and zombies would be so bored as to try and force me into a marriage. Your Highness, you're already more than 300 years old, and the king next door already has 5 generations of grandchildren. Yet, you're still an old bachelor. I've let down the previous king's teachings. Who's an old bachelor? What does it have to do with my father whether or not I have a woman? I already have a girlfriend. Eliza, a demon lord, a flame sea marchioness. She's super strong, aren't you afraid? So what if she's a semigod and a demon lord? The Mist family wants a female master, not a hired thug. Even a demon marchioness can't have children, so why should I be afraid? Your Highness, please think about it. If you die, who will we old fellows be loyal to? The Mist family's 2,000 years of inheritance can't be lost in our generation. Miss Eliza can indeed be a mistress, but the Mist family needs a female master who can have children. I was quite angry that someone was forcing me to get married in front of everyone. But from a certain standpoint, old Sir Ferdinand, who had been loyal to the Mist family for generations and was my elder, could indeed act as my father. I couldn't even vent my anger. But if that was all there was to it, I could still accept it. Previously, I didn't have many living subordinates under my command. But now that Timlad and the others had joined the Mist family, I had more and more living subordinates under my command. This made some things more troublesome. Your Highness, Even the long-term mercenaries working for major merchants are loyal to the merchant family. You have more and more subordinates. Even if you don't care about yourself, you still need to think about them. At the very least, they'll have a place to pay their pensions if they die, and their families will be able to take care of them when they're old. That's where you'll have nothing to worry about. Yes, Your Highness. You should at least think about your subordinates and give them a chance to become nobles. Even if the powerful individuals don't care about such things, do you think those low-level warriors and youths wouldn't care? Even those dark elves would want a stable family. Ever since we returned to the Northlands and were able to walk under the sun, these night owlers kept nagging me. I could understand how they felt. They had returned to their homeland, but everything had changed. They hoped that the Mist family could be revived and that the family they were loyal to would be able to continue. But in the end, a certain someone's words made me decide to rebuild the Mist family. Actually, I think that Her Highness Renee would be a great choice as the future female master of the Mist family. It's perfectly fine for her to split from the Mist family and return to the original Mist family. Even the palace can be returned to the original one. That would be perfect. Cough, I wasn't talking about that. I threw this bastard out of a window on the 3rd floor. Later, I found out that he had received benefits from Renee. Then, I punished Renee by swinging her sword 1,000 times. Your Highness, even if it's for our own good, with the Mist family, we can even adopt a son to inherit our martial arts and honor. This way, our family won't be cut off, and our family will have a meaning of passing on. As far as the eye could see, it wasn't just 1 or 2 undead Night Awless Knight whose soulfire was filled with hope. Instead, it was all the undead Night Awless. Being accepted by a living person and being able to adopt a son to continue their family was a beautiful dream that the Mist Kingdom's Royal Night Awless family didn't even dare to dream about. Now that they were only one step away from their dream, how could these Royal Night Awless family, who valued honor and inheritance, endure it? You can just adopt a son to rebuild your family. It won't affect me. Your Highness, who will the new family be loyal to? Our adopted son and his descendants will be loyal to their descendants. Alright then, from a certain standpoint, this was just like how the commoners wouldn't dare to light up their lamps if the officials didn't set them on fire. Something seemed off about this. Even if it was only for the sake of the loyal Night Awless family members who had followed me for so long, it was necessary to rebuild the Mist family. After all, it was only a change of name, and it wouldn't affect me from doing what I wanted to do. In the end, I agreed. But, just the announcement of this news caused both the living and the dead to become more enthusiastic about their work by at least 50%. I couldn't help but sigh. As expected, this was still a feudal society where traditional values were deeply ingrained. It would seem that while it's important to have a common goal, we do indeed need a long-term meal ticket as a material guarantee, and right now, for the sake of the great trouble that was about to begin, the strength I gathered was the entirety of the new Mist family. Chapter 395. When are we going to retrieve the god equipment of the elements? His high elf form didn't have the elegance unique to his species. The storms around him made his anxiety obvious. As time passed, the wind elemental god Camderon's patience was wearing thin. When are we going to Dragon World? The elders are all waiting. You should have finished reading the information already. This time, it wasn't the always smiling copper dragon that came to rush me. The cold blue dragon Evelyn surprised everyone. Your Highness, when are we going to repair the earth elemental throne? The great stone sculptor was also quite anxious. From a certain standpoint, she had been in a state of excitement ever since she learned that she was the top candidate for the earth elemental throne. Just wait. How are we supposed to fight the boss if we don't have enough people? That's right, I wasn't going to sacrifice myself for the Snake Archduchess and the other two. Since I already knew how ridiculously powerful the enemies we were going to be facing would be, how could I possibly start an expedition to another world when I didn't have enough combat strength? Perhaps this is the true test of the Holy War. This time, I had put in a lot of effort. Judging from the combat strength I had gathered, I had sent out my full strength. There were indeed many people here, but after reorganizing them, I divided them into 3 main groups. The first group was the former Mist Kingdom's Royal Knight, the Undying Undead Warriors. There were nearly 25,000 of them, and they were my most trusted knight. They were also the strongest existences, and quite a few of them had reached Valkyrie's power level. They would forever be my strongest trump card. Due to the trouble of being undead, only about 2,000 of them were active on the surface. They were all involved in the Mist Alliance's construction. Some of them were serving as instructors and team leaders for the various combat squads in Donglan, while others were active in the undead kingdom of Shilu. They were currently attempting to rebuild the Yongye army. Of course, unlike the chaotic alliance of undead lords, this army was my personal army. Their battle flag was the traditional Mist War flag. That was a remnant of the past, as well as a symbol of the glory of inheritance. When they made up their minds to wave their swords, when this old war flag once again flew in the air, the undying who were unwilling to die here would use blood and fire to remind them of what it meant to be a warrior's glory and an undying knight. Although this was my strongest trump card, it was also the most inconvenient to use. Just summoning them would cause countless countries to be highly vigilant. That was why I could only have most of my members train their combat techniques in the underground world. But recently, they had an additional responsibility to train the newcomers. Not only would they inherit combat techniques and abilities, but they would also inherit honor and inheritance. This time, I had gathered a total of 6,000 undead knights through the Mizza and the recently completed Greedy Wolf Airship No. 1. I had also relied on Bardi's reputation and guarantee to have these two magic bone airships surrounded by Black Mist Pass by various countries. If the Red Hunting Hounds were the most inconvenient but most trustworthy force in my arsenal, then the combat strength below me was probably the most convenient but least trustworthy force in my arsenal. Oh my, why are there 2 eggs and a chicken drumstick for lunch today? Don't you know? To celebrate the official establishment of the Northlands Mist family, there's going to be an extra meal for lunch and an extra bottle of ale for dinner. Has His Highness Roland finally made up his mind? Wait a moment, isn't this a super joyous occasion? A celebratory banquet and revival ceremony? Our boss is a living legend. As long as he says the word, all the mega empires will probably send people over, right? Could it be that the official celebration has been delayed? Normally speaking, a family's revival and establishment would be the most important event. Inviting guests would be quite simple, but it would be quite common for a family to celebrate for an entire year and spend all the taxes they had earned from their territories for the past 3 years. This wasn't just for the sake of reputation, but also to show off the family's connections and foundational power. No, having an extra meal for lunch is already a celebration. His Highness Roland said that he's been busy recently and that his career is more important, so he wants to skip the formalities. Is that enough? Why do I feel like he thinks it's too troublesome? I think so as well. He's our boss, after all, so he's different from the rest. However, there are some things that he doesn't skip. You know the 5th son of the Eston family, right? That crippled 5th son? Didn't he retire to the 2nd line after he lost his leg in the Northlands Beastmen War? His 2nd son also died in that meat grinder battle. How pitiful. His Highness Roland made him a knight. At the very least, he won't have to worry about starving to death for the rest of his life. We're so lucky. His Highness Roland is starting to confer knight titles. That's wonderful. Do we have hope? Forget it, we're just bronze-ranked warriors. It won't be our turn no matter what. Just pretend I didn't say anything. According to the rules of Ike, the lowest rank that could be conferred as a knight title would be at least silver-ranked. This was something that ordinary people wouldn't be able to achieve even if they worked hard for their entire lives. His Highness Roland is different from others. He doesn't care much about power levels. Instead, he cares about achievement. The first batch has 30 people. Our mercenary group has 16 people. All of them have first-class achievements. The ones who self-destructed in the Titan Mecha are all here. We only have a 3rd-class achievement each. Don't count on us this time. But at least there's hope. Ah, 5th son is so good. Even if he can't go to the battlefield in the future, just this title alone will be enough for him to eat for the rest of his life. PH, don't look down on the crippled 5th son. If he wasn't as ruthless as you, how could he have received the Blood Knight medal? That old fellow has been nagging those goblins in the Magic Research Institute's mechanical division every day. He's forcing them to take out artificial limbs with cannons. That old fellow doesn't plan on being a knight to the end. He wants his own son to become a knight. The lowest rank of knight viscounts didn't have the right to inherit their titles. Only barons could inherit their titles. However, if they didn't have any military achievements, their title would be demoted. That was why, generally speaking, barons were the true nobility that was recognized by the public. A small knight title, even if they were lucky enough to obtain a piece of land, would at most be a village with 30 to 50 households. Perhaps this wasn't worth mentioning to strong people. However, for mercenaries who fought on the battlefield, it was a lifelong dream. That's right, mercenaries from the super mercenary group, the Absolute Gentleman Alliance. Although I wanted to talk to them about shared ideals and the beautiful dream of saving the world, as well as the impending long night, for them, ideals were nothing more than the extravagant wishes of nobles who didn't have to worry about their stomachs. Only a stable income and the opportunity to become a noble would be their lifelong dream. As for Armageddon, if they didn't have enough to eat or were fatally injured, or if they were disabled and didn't have enough money saved up for retirement, every day would be Armageddon. Mercenaries aren't trustworthy. This was the common opinion of mercenaries in every country about mercenaries who worked for money. And in most situations, they weren't wrong at all. As mercenaries who fought for money, they naturally had to think about their own futures. If they fought to the death or became disabled, their savings wouldn't even be enough for the rest of their lives. And as a warrior on the battlefield, it was absolutely necessary to lack the will to fight. When an ace knight squadron was able to hold on for 70% of the time, these mercenaries who worked for money would collapse at 10% of the time. If they relied too much on mercenaries, it would become a weakness of their army. No matter how strong their combat strength is, it's impossible to trust or have high hopes for them. And since mercenaries worked for money, if the enemy offered a higher price, there were plenty of examples of entire mercenary groups betraying each other. It was even easier for individual mercenary groups to betray or be bribed. That was why for large-scale battles, even if these mercenary groups obtained permission to participate, they would only serve as cannon fodder. This was what mercenaries were: vultures on the battlefield who fought for benefits. They weren't bound by the knight's creed, and were more practical than anything else. But as long as they were given enough food, they would become vicious lions. Ordinary mercenary groups wouldn't accept battlefield missions that had a high death rate. However, there were also some battlefield mercenary groups that would choose to roam the cliffs even if they were cannon fodder. Apart from the fact that these battlefield missions offered incredibly high rewards, it was even more likely that they would be taken over by a major noble if they were recognized. If they became a major noble's private army, the mercenary group's higher-ups would have the opportunity to become nobles, and the ordinary warriors would also become regular soldiers. At the very least, they would have military pay and pension in case they were disabled or died in battle. However, the Absolute Gentleman Mercenary Alliance was slightly different from ordinary mercenary groups. The tree planted intentionally wouldn't grow, but the willow planted unintentionally would grow. This mercenary group that had been created as a joke had actually become stronger and stronger in recent years. The mercenary group's leader was me, and they could be called my personal soldiers. Their fighting spirit and loyalty far surpassed that of ordinary private soldiers. As the Absolute Gentleman Mercenary Alliance expanded their range of operations, with the support of the Northlands countries, their mercenary group now had offices in more than 30 countries. In fact, they even had 17 large-scale mercenary groups in each country. Their total number of registered mercenaries now exceeded 300,000. More than 70% of the mercenaries were from Donglan or Sluware. It could be said that more than 80% of the members were people of the Mist. They were willing to join this mercenary group not only because this mercenary group had excellent treatment and reputation, but also because they trusted me as the leader of this mercenary group. They believed that I would give them a bright future. In the past battles, they had indeed performed quite well. No matter if it was the bloody battles against the beast men in the Northlands or the continuous battles in the South, they had always displayed sufficient loyalty and ability. But as mercenaries, they naturally had their own expectations. They hoped that they would have a bright future, rich rewards, and a chance to return home in glory. Of course, these mega-large-scale mercenary groups were also divided into different levels. Those on the outside only needed ability and a clean reputation, but after a certain level of development, the core combat groups would always be the core. As for the warriors who had displayed sufficient ability and loyalty in the past, the mercenary group would sign long-term contracts with them for 20, 30, or even 50 years. If they broke the contract, they would no longer need to work as a mercenary. They would basically never need to think about jumping around in the future. And while they received rewards and protection, they would also repay the responsibilities and requirements of the long-term contract. Actually, these mercenaries who had signed long-term contracts known as lifetime contracts didn't even consider themselves to be mercenaries in their words or actions. We're all warriors of His Highness Roland. It's just that it's not convenient for us to form a combat group right now. No matter what, we're all warriors of His Highness. There are some things that we need to pay attention to. At the very least, we can't stain that battle flag. And now, the conferment of knight titles and the raising of the Mist family's flag seemed to prove this saying. And so, countless mercenaries were applying for long-term contracts within the mercenary group. And now, after the news that I had decided to rebuild the Northland's Mist family spread, the number of new applications to join the mercenary group increased by nearly 20,000 in just 3 short days. And when the news that I had conferred 16 knight titles from my mercenary group spread, the number of new applications to join the mercenary group increased by 50,000. From a certain standpoint, since I didn't have a territory, wasn't a king, and wasn't loyal to any domain lord, I couldn't even be considered a pure nobleman. Logically speaking, I also didn't have the right to confer knight titles. However, it seemed that no matter if it was outsiders or my subordinates, all of them ignored this most basic of noble conventions. Of course, I wasn't going to make empty promises. The knight titles that I conferred would be recognized by the various countries in the Northlands. And after they achieved enough meritorious deeds to become noblemen, I would think of a way to help them obtain their own territory. Only barons and above would be able to obtain a territory, but usually only counts with military achievements would be able to do so, and the success rate would be extremely low. This time, the Borealis had brought over 5,600 long-term contracts with me. It didn't seem like much, but the fact that they were able to pass through so many tests and sign a long-term contract already proved their abilities and loyalty. Their average power level had reached the astonishing bronze rank. From a certain standpoint, they were indeed my core private troops. Now that the situation had developed to such a degree, perhaps it was also the best evidence of the usefulness of reputation and legitimacy. In the Donglan capital Definda and the Sluware capital Antoon, all sorts of rumors of grand chess moves and premeditated plots were spreading all over the streets. Even the peddlers on the street corners were saying things like Prince Roland used the name of a mercenary group to gather the warriors who yearned for the Mist's battle flag, and the royalty of the Northlands and Northlands hated this sort of stealing, but couldn't do anything about it. Not only are there the 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers among those mercenaries, there's even an Aurora Knight. How could these ace troops possibly be wild? It's so obvious, and they still dare to call themselves mercenaries. Actually, I had only intended to make a joke at the time. In fact, I didn't even manage the development of the mercenary group for a long period of time. Being able to develop to this point, apart from the fact that those mercenaries were truly powerful, perhaps it was purely due to the people of the Mist's trust in that tattered battle flag. He's our prince, and he'll lead us to a better life. Yep, it's because of his arrival that we've had the most comfortable winter in the past 50 years. This year, not a single person froze to death on the streets, and the people who moved to other places have all returned to their homeland. It would be a joke if I said that I was able to attract so many people of the Mist to fight for me just based on my reputation and so-called legitimacy of the Mist family. However, the Northland's Mist family's accumulated honor and trust over the past 2,000 years was my most valuable asset, yet also a heavy burden that made it hard for me to breathe. Not to mention a mercenary group. Even if you used your own name and that battle flag to open a circus, it would still be filled with people of the Mist. If you don't believe me, you can ask your undead knight. They've long since reached the level of blind loyalty where they don't ask why, but only what to do. I didn't know how to respond to Harloise's teasing. I knew that she was telling the truth. As for their trust, the only thing I, a fallen prince who couldn't even protect my home, could do to repay them was to think of a way to lead them through this calamity that was akin to Armageddon. Perhaps the future will be difficult, but at least we'll all be together. Perhaps in the eyes of outsiders, they were still nothing more than mercenaries. However, these young people who had given their lives to me were already a part of me. The Absolute Gentleman Alliance's battle flag was a black ball mask. As for what it symbolized, there were countless theories on the market. But at the time, I had only used this flag because I wanted to remind those bastards who had already become the core members of my mercenary group, remember to wear a mask when you're doing something bad. I don't want to go to the police station to take someone away. As for things like gazing at the light in the darkness, a person who's resolved himself to lose everything, a night ranger who doesn't need a face, and so on, those were obviously just exaggerated explanations. Apart from the Red Hunting Hounds and the Absolute Gentleman Alliance, the third largest organization was the Magic Engineering Research Institute and the Schindler Merchant Group, which were also known as the Magic Research Institute. They were already at the forefront of the new generation. Not only were they the dawn of the new generation, they were also the logistics department of the Mist faction that was gradually becoming more united. Not only were they researchers, but they also had the 4 elemental swordcasters, magic archers, great engineers, and great alchemists. The Borealis, Avarice, and Mizza were 3 super battleships, as well as 6 medium-sized battleships and 3-digit small battleships. They had a total combat strength of 13,000 people, 6 to 7 great engineers who were at least gold rank, 427 engineering and alchemy experts, and countless war machines. This was more than enough to start a small-scale war on the scale of a small country. Of course, after investing so much, I hoped to obtain even more, so much more that even I felt like I was being too greedy. I think that if those dragons know what you're planning, they'll definitely think of a way to kill you. Since you're after their most precious treasure, wouldn't they be opening the door to a thief? I think so as well. But by the time they find out, I should have already achieved my goal. Besides, it would be a waste to give them a treasure of this level, so I might as well make the best use of it. After all, winter's coming. I shook my head. If it was winter, then it sounded like spring wasn't far away. But when I looked at my timeline, I couldn't see any signs of spring's arrival, and I didn't have much time left. If I really had to describe it, I would probably say that the apocalypse is coming. Still, it's already so much better than in the game's history. At the very least, we still have hope this time, as long as my plan can be realized. Then, how confident are you in your plan? I really want to say 100%, but unfortunately, even 10% is too much. But at least it's not completely hopeless. I looked out the window at the trees that had just sprouted. This seemed like a rare good omen. Yeah, at least it's not completely hopeless. And this time, our goal is to create our own hope so that our future days will be easier. Even if it means destroying other people's hope. Of course. Chapter 396. About Cher's Treatment Plan, 3rd edition. I had carefully written out my treatment plan in a thick booklet. Plan 1. Transfer her soul and create a new physical body to transfer her soul to. The advantage of this plan is that it's easy to operate. I can create a perfect physical body in a short period of time. If it's just a pure soul transfer, there's basically no chance of any mistakes with my technology. The disadvantage is that it's an undead creation, so it's definitely not as useful as a physical body. Don't even think about having children, but I can perfectly duplicate food and normal male and female entertainment. Back then, I sealed a portion of my soul's essence into it. This time, it's impossible to create such a useful miraculous creation. P.S. Since the 7 original sins are related to the mysteries of soul searching, I can't be sure if the new physical body will inherit the original problem. That's why this plan still needs to be perfected. Plan 2. Refine her soul and remove the lust part of her soul, turning her into an idiot with no love cells. That way, she'll never fall in love with anyone else. Naturally, she won't activate this system, strongly recommended. The advantage of this plan is that it's simple, direct, and one step. A perfect soul surgery will completely solve the seasonal problem of love. But the disadvantage is that even though soul surgery is more complete, if you're unlucky, it's quite normal for your soul to become unstable and your soul to split, resulting in multiple personalities. Strongly recommended. Note: this plan is the best way to preserve this perfect circulation system. When my technology improves, all the problems will naturally be solved. Yep, I should say that preserving the original lust system will be very helpful to my personal research. I should be able to make a breakthrough soon, and it's even possible for you to obtain new sisters. When I presented these two plans to Evelyn, I fully hoped that she would choose the latter. That was because no matter how I looked at it, the latter would be the best for us. Not only that, it would help her get rid of the chronic problem of love. This was such a powerful treatment plan. Permanently stripping away the most basic sin from the soul. This is a miracle that only I, a genius in soul surgery, can achieve. What? The side effect of having multiple personalities? What kind of side effect would that be? Having multiple personalities would bring about many different talents and abilities. This was a free gift. Didn't you see how powerful Evelyn was right now? She had 10 personalities and 10 different talent. As expected of one of my very first creations. Yet, this blue dragon only took a glance at the plan before unhesitatingly placing it in front of her. She then sniffed, "Suck." Alright, it didn't snot spurt out. It seemed like this female dragon loved cleanliness. However, I didn't have the time to save him. This time, instead of inhaling, he spat out lightning. Thus, the treatment plan that I had worked so hard on was destroyed. You guys are too much. It took me 2 whole days. 20 minutes. Bring out your third plan. Aren't you just waiting for us to reject these 2 plans so that the third plan can be passed quickly? Don't look at me so strangely. We know very well how awkward you are. Don't you love a truly perfect scheme, making your opponent believe that the situation before him is his best choice? All I have to do is create an environment where he has no choice but to choose according to my expectations. Alright, this sentence does seem to be my tone. It's extremely awkward. Although I would have to bring out my third plan sooner or later, it was still quite displeasing to be seen through by others. I pouted, but still brought it out. Since I had already come up with a plan, I naturally had to bring it out. Third plan: give her physical psychotherapy to help her understand that love is a purely neurological disease. Yep, it's basically a mental illness. Children in puberty will spend a lot of time and energy on it, but they'll get nothing out of it. That's why we need to guide her and have her read more books and exercise more, so that she can focus most of her energy on her studies and career, such as fighting for the betterment of humanity. We need to delay the time when she starts having a mental illness. Usually, she won't have a mental illness after puberty, but if she still enters estrus, we'll directly freeze her for a long period of time. Blue Dragon Evelyn chuckled. And then, there was no then. Hey, why did you swallow it? I had a really hard time writing it. Fourth plan? No. Fine, here it is. This book was rather thin, with only 1 page, so I directly read it out loud. This is addiction. This is electronic heroin. So-called love is nothing but an illusion. She needs electrotherapy. She needs more electric shocks and electric chairs. I think that you're the one who needs electrotherapy. Treat your hopeless head in the lightning. A powerful thunderstorm covered the entire sky. Although it wouldn't be fatal, it would be impossible for me to escape from being charred black. The most annoying part was that all my hair was standing on end due to the electric reaction. A golden mohawk? Isn't this a rural, non-mainstream hairstyle? You're going too far. I'm going to fight you to the death. I finally understood why blue dragons were so annoying. They were far too hot-tempered. I was just joking because the atmosphere was too tense. You don't have any sense of humor at all. If you can't take a joke, you should have said so earlier. Nobody can take your jokes, right? Let me say this first. If you want to do experiments, go find your new favorite. Don't use me. I ignored the silly cat's complaints and angrily took out a new backup plan from my backpack. Backup plans. 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 Plan 4. Through hypnosis and books, we can slowly change her sexual orientation and make her fall in love with a female. Then, we'll see if this will trigger a trap. If it doesn't, we'll have plenty of time to observe. Rip. Alright then, next. Plan 5. Brainwash her, or give her a permanent mental retardation spell. As long as her intelligence falls to the level of an infant. Fine, stop scolding me. Plan 6. Plan 13. Modify her physical body and reconstruct her reproductive organs so that she becomes him. Will he still fall in love with the opposite sex? Yep, this is a topic worthy of our research. Cough, I got it. I'll give up on Plan 13. Plan 14. We can use a forbidden spell to seal her away forever, or we can ask Amelia to cast a sleeping beauty curse on her. What? She's still not satisfied with this? What a difficult customer to serve. Fine. Plan 15. Plan 27. We can go find Beifong. Fine, don't do anything. It's all my fault for using Beifong first, so I'll cancel this plan. We were currently in a gigantic underground cave that was so large that we couldn't even see the top of our heads. While I was chatting with Evelyn, a long army was marching behind us. Countless craftsmen and warriors were slowly moving forward with their luggage and carts. Their destination was a dimensional portal in front of us, the entrance to Dragon World. Fortunately, this was a portal to Dragon World. If all dragons, including the immemorial dragons, could freely go out, this portal would have long since been large enough to accommodate airships. Right now, I was chatting with Evelyn, the elder responsible for guarding the dragons here. But right now, I was only chatting with the copper dragon and blue dragon that I was rather familiar with. So many boring plans. Have you been very free lately? No, I've been super busy recently, so I've been making plans to adjust my schedule. Work and rest should be balanced, you know. Why are you scolding me again? Do you think Blue Dragon can be so unreasonable? You actually treat Cher and my treatment as entertainment. Shouldn't you be taught a lesson for having such an attitude? The Blue Dragon said this expressionlessly. But no matter how I looked at it, it seemed like she was just trying to find an excuse to mess with me. Could it be that I had offended her in some way? Perhaps you've offended her in too many ways. Not only did you offend her in the past, even now, any normal person would think that you're obviously making trouble out of malice upon seeing these plans. But I'm being serious. That's even worse. She's hopeless. No, Cher can still be saved. We can't give up on treatment. I'm saying that your brain is hopeless. You should stop struggling and give up on treatment. Alright then, what followed next was the usual man-cat blitz. Phut, Roland, you've truly changed. Copper Dragon Evelyn, who had been calmly drinking tea and chatting, sighed when she saw this farce. I've become more handsome. It's probably because of my many years on the battlefield that I've become more manly. I don't know if I've become more handsome, but I've definitely become cuter. Princess Peach's picture album has been selling really well recently. I bought one as well, and all my sisters are fighting over it. They all say it's so cute. Harlois, remember to remind me to throw that bastard into the Mrs. airship cannons. Yep, I mean that blasphemous creature with 2 legs and a tail. I agree, but will the airship cannons be enough? I think we should use the Borealis main cannons instead. Cleaning the cannons will be so troublesome. Since we had nothing better to do, we chatted here. However, someone couldn't bear to watch this any longer. Back then, you had such a lonely expression. You looked like you were smiling, but you actually felt like you were crying. You were filled with hatred towards the entire world, just like a man who had been betrayed by the entire world. To everyone's astonishment, Blue Dragon Evelyn finally spoke up. Although she still had a serious expression as she spoke, her eyes flashed with the color of memories. Suddenly, those memories transformed into joy as the frost on her face instantly thawed. You were so cool. An avenger who treated the entire world as his enemy. Her delighted expression made her seem as if she was a young girl who chased after her favorite celebrity. Image, fifth sister, your image of an icy beauty has been completely destroyed. We all silently nodded in response to Copper Dragon Evelyn's comment. Her image of an icy beauty was completely gone. She's so logical that I actually have nothing to say. The silly cat's comments were getting better and better. It would seem that I was indeed well trained. But suddenly, Blue Dragon Evelyn suddenly glared at me, and then, P2E. Blue Dragon Evelyn spat on the ground in disdain as she turned to look at me with a look of disdain. I was still rather nervous to be stared at by a beauty like this. If you were the handsome prince of revenge from a legendary story, now you're nothing more than a comical idiot. She's so logical. I actually have nothing to say. The black cat on my shoulder pretended to be astonished. All right then, silly cat, there's no need to comment anymore. Why are you nodding so vigorously? Don't think that I didn't notice that you changed the exclamation mark. Do you really agree so much? If I'm a professional comedian, then aren't you a professional comedian? So we've always been a classic crosstalk duo. If you want to be a comedian, go ahead. Don't drag me into this. I'm not the same as you. PH, such a professional comment. And you still dare to say that you're not a comedian. Harlois, the genes for being a comedian have already been buried in your bones. You were born to be a comedic cat. All right then, the second battle between a cat and a human began. However, the Evelyns exchanged glances and began to secretly laugh. They were sent to communicate with Roland because they were the sisters who were more attached to the past. Now that they saw the current Roland, they realized many things and began to communicate spiritually with each other. Fifth sister, compared to the seemingly cold but actually kind fellow in my memories, I hate the hidden melancholy and anger in his eyes. I like the guy in front of me more. Of course you like him. Haven't you always enjoyed watching comedies? But Roland was indeed like this, which was reassuring. A message from second sister? The two of them silently read the message. In the end, it was Copper Dragon Evelyn who spoke up first. Roland, why do I feel like you're intentionally keeping us busy so that we won't check if the goods you brought into Dragon World contain anything illegal? I feel like you're insulting our intelligence. We're not those customs officials who can be easily fooled. All right then, it seemed that it wouldn't be so easy to fool them. And so, as I handed over the real treatment plan, I smiled and asked, what level of goods do you think are considered illegal for powerful dragons? Heh, did you really think that I would bring something like a Salos crystal with me? I still want to live for a few more years. Before I could finish my explanation, the two dragon race members exclaimed in unison in the next moment. You really brought a Salos crystal? No, I was just giving an example. Just an example. Second sister is right. He's actually seriously explaining himself, which means that he's feeling guilty. He definitely brought a Salos crystal with him. Why would you casually bring such a powerful weapon with you? Are you intending to start a world war? All right then, it seemed that I wouldn't be able to hide it from them anymore. But just as I was hesitating whether to force my way through, or confess and be sent to prison, something seemed wrong. Cough, at this critical moment, the two female dragons smiled at each other and focused their attention on the treatment plan in their hands. It seems that we've been let off the hook. Like I said, you could have just brought the Salos crystal with you. Why did you have to play such tricks? Others are probably looking down on you now. Would you really allow someone to bring a nuclear bomb that could alter the continental shelf at any moment into your home? That's a matter of principle. How could I have known that they'd be so open-minded and have no standpoint? I couldn't help but mutter to myself as I watched my old friends who were intentionally discussing the treatment plan and pretending to know nothing. Perhaps it's not that they have no principles or standpoint, it's that their standpoint isn't what I originally knew.